This is the regularly scheduled Shelburne Select Board meeting of Tuesday, August 27th, 2019, which I call to order. The next item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Jamie moves, Colleen seconds to approve. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. For purposes of record, Mary will not be joining us tonight. The next item is to approve Select Board meeting minutes of August 6th. Those of us who were there are Colleen, Mike, and myself. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mike
Second.
moves, Colleen seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye, and those opposed, nay. Jamie not voting for reason of not having been present. The next set of minutes are August 13th. I do have two comments. One on the top of page 2, the gentleman, even though he may take offense at that description, is Mr. Berger. And I believe Mary voted nay. That would be page 3, number 13. I'm pretty sure she's not with us tonight, but I'm pretty sure maybe others of us remember that that vote was 4-1.
Thank you.
It shows 4-0, which leads me to believe that that was just an omission.
Then it was
But
3-1.
I'm pretty sure she voted nay there.
So
Then it would be 3-1.
Yeah,
3-1.
3-1?
0.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
3-1.
We should probably check whether
We should just check
before,
that. Yeah, I can't remember. I think that's
That
right.
seems right, but
I remember she was between us and she voted, I'm pretty sure she voted nay on the fees, but in any case, we
Yeah, I
better
think
check
you're right.
with her before you
Okay.
make that correction. With those in consideration, is there a motion to approve?
I'll
So
move.
moved. Second.
Abstain.
Jamie and Mike both move in second. It would be just the three of us. Colleen, is there any discussion? Further discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. Colleen not voting
Abstain.
for reason of not having been present. The next item are public comments, which are in our routine. We begin with the new Library Town Center, and welcome Ruth.
Hello. So I am very excited because I think this is the last time I'm going to come down here and do this. All right, that's my plan. So we had a great meeting today with Negley and Chase and VAA. Everything is just coming together. We're talking punch list next week, which is a couple of days of actually going through, generating the list, and then Negley and Chase going through and making sure it's either all getting done or scheduled to be completed. We talked to the elevator guys today, and he's planning on plugging it in tomorrow and seeing if it goes up and down, which is great. I'm sure after you get it plugged in, then there's still more things that have to be done, including some inspections. But I think really we are actually coming to the end, and I hope so, because we're coming to the end of the lease over there at the field house. So currently, Kevin, the library director, is planning to close the library on the 5th of September and move everything over here and reopen in the new library with a grand opening ceremony on the 14th, which is a Saturday. And the events, I believe he is thinking of starting about 9:30 in the morning with just a few things and then opening the building at 10, the way we always do on Saturdays. So we want everybody in town to come because we want everybody in town to see what we've been doing over there. And I believe paving, I guess that's the only outstanding thing is paving. Did they finish this evening?
Yes, I watched them put the rollers on the truck and,
And they
drive
left.
them away. So all that's
Great.
left is line striping, which was slated for tomorrow morning, but it's supposed to rain tomorrow, so it may be later in the week. But yes, pavers are
Right.
out of here.
Okay. So we're done. We're going to have a grand opening. We'll have some more announcements about that. And the last thing I want to say is I do want to thank the Select Board. And so it's hard to thank the Select Board because you're a group of people that keeps changing, okay? But overall, the Select Board as a concept has been supportive of this project since you reached out to the trustees in 2014. The Select Board in 2014 recognized the building was failing that we were in and went ahead and put together an initiative, reached out to us, we set up a committee, and since that time, the Select Board has been supportive. You've made this project consistently a priority of the town manager, which I know has been a large amount of time and we, the trustees, truly appreciate that. You went ahead and put it out to bond, and we truly appreciate that. That it would not have happened without that. You've been very supportive. You've invited me down here regularly for updates, so we appreciate all of that. I want to say specifically for the select board, we did have a committee, and there were select board members on that. And the first member we may remember was Colleen, who was on with me in August 2014. So that's been 5 years that we've been trying to get this done. And Colleen really brought to us what we needed at the time, which was a real can-do attitude. She was always optimistic and positive, and she would come in and she'd be like, all right, you guys, we're going to do this. And we needed that because we had kind of hit sort of the doldrums. So we truly appreciate that from Colleen. And then later, Jerry and Colleen switched positions, and Jerry came on right at the time that we actually needed Jerry's ability to cut through sort of Gordian knots. We had reached a couple of decisions that needed to be made that were very complex, and he could see how to focus on the actual question and then address that and then address all the satellite issues, which is a real skill. I wish that I had that skill. So we truly appreciate Colleen and Jerry for their time and the general support of the select board. The trustees really, truly are grateful for that. So, and thank you.
Oh,
And-
thank you, Ruth.
All right.
Thank you. That's very generous of you, Ruth,
Well,
because
no.
it wouldn't have occurred without the trustees, you and Kathy, the committee.
The committee.
It's a
yeah.
pretty,
It's been
I
a
hope
real-
the story never gets tiresome
Right.
about how a community d- envisioned and designed and developed and paid for and are going
Mm-hmm.
to make the best use of a library town center such as we now have as a community matter.
Right.
As just us,
Right,
just us folks.
right. Just
It's a
Shelburne.
pretty astonishing story, really, so.
It is. And it's been a real group effort. I think that's the
Yeah,
thing, is it's not really
yeah.
an individual effort. It's been,
We can be
a lot of
proud of
different
all the
people.
parts all of us have played, but we can be most proud of the community for the step it took and the support it was and
Mm-hmm. Yes.
is. So,
yes.
we hope the elevator doesn't go sideways and doesn't
no, we
go up
better
and
not.
down.
I have bad
So-
dreams about that.
Where's the plug gonna be? You said they're gonna plug it in.
I don't know. It's very
Forgot the
complicated to
plug.
put together an elevator, I have to say.
Well, I'm gonna miss your
All right.
your
Yeah.
updates.
All
They've
right.
been really, I really looked forward to them. You can come back and give us
I can come
updates.
back
at
and
your
give you
Yeah.
updates about something else. All right,
We
well,
have some
maybe I'll
other
think of
things
something.
we could
Oh,
ask you to
no,
take
you
a
don't
look
wanna-
at.
no, no,
and
no, no, no,
Come
no.
back and keep us posted.
Another
We-
project.
A different project, Gary.
New books that have arrived
All right.
this week.
But I also just want to mention that I thought it was a really good example of yet another example of how two groups, the select board and the library trustees, could come together and also include community members, because that steering committee was even mixture of select board members, with the town manager as one representative, the library board of trustees, and at least 3 official community members were on the committee, and everybody came together, and so I felt it was like really well balanced, and there's a lot of outreach into the community with charrettes and polls and education in the newspaper and on Front Porch Forum, and it was really well covered by the Shelburne newspaper, and I think that everybody
Yeah,
did
we
a
do
really
owe
good
them a
job.
big thanks to-
It is a project that the entire community can own.
Right.
Yeah,
Rumor
thank you
has
so
it
much,
that
Ruth.
there's a trophy in the form of a golden dolly, that we're going to award to Kevin for all his experience and his leadership and his generalship of a pretty complex set of moves to and from. And to maintain a library all this while is a great credit to his professionalism and dedication. So
Yeah, the staff has put
Yeah.
up with a lot, and we need to mention that. I'm
Yeah.
planning to talk to that at our grand opening, because
so we
the
can
staff
find a
have-
dolly, and if we can afford to
Yeah,
gold plate
spray
it,
spray
you know.
paint it. I'm sure he thinks-
Otherwise, he'll just have to hear it, that's
Yeah,
all.
all right.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Hey, Susan.
Susan McClellan, Falls Road. I'd like to make a comment on open burning in the village. I know it's sacrilegious to say anything about people's fire pits in their backyard, but for the last 4 nights, we've had to close our windows and not, and we've been in our home for 4 nights on Sunday morning, Sarah and I were walking around the village, and I think there was something atmospherically going on that kept all of this smoke down low. And it's affected a lot of us. And then on Sunday, I decided, well, the air is cleared about 10 o'clock. I'll go out and have a cup of coffee on the deck, and my neighbor starts burning brush. And he had a permit. You know, I called, he had a permit, everything was fine. But I mean, you know, we're talking about density in the village, how we want, you know, there's a new development going in on the other side of the bridge, and we're going to be closer and closer together. And I don't know if there are any rules about how far away you need to be to have a fire pit, but, you know, I have asthma also, so it really does aggravate in a very small, confined little area in the village. Sarah and I thought maybe there was a barn fire or something in the area, because on Sunday it was very bad. This was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday night. So needless to say, we closed up the house before we left tonight, just in case. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, we're sorry you had to endure that. I mean, you have a comment, Lee? And
Certainly something we can look
Yeah.
into. It
Yeah.
gets hard sometimes how far you can go to regulate certain things, but we can certainly.
It was
look
kind
into
of an inversion. I know I was out in the garden Sunday. It's the same thing that sometimes leads us to be right next door to the music, and sometimes to hear absolutely nothing and have no idea anybody's across the street.
We
Yeah.
stopped at the police station.
Yeah.
He said he rode around all evening looking for a fire.
Yeah,
And he
yeah,
could never find it. And he
Yeah.
said even his cruiser
yeah.
smelled smoky
Wow.
from just
Well-
out riding around. So,
This thick haze, and it made it really hard to breathe.
Well, thank you for bringing it to our attention. We appreciate that. Are there any other comments? Hearing none, the next item are select board comments. I'd like to just start quickly. First, be alert and aware tomorrow, school starts. Children are going to be in odd places, and some of them may be where they shouldn't be for a few days. Buses will appear on the roadways. Please give every benefit of the doubt to whomever's on the road tomorrow, especially during school traffic hours. As well, Lee made the comment to me, we urge our older youngsters who are driving to do so as carefully as they possibly can when they head over to CVU. I'd like to thank those who were involved in the Shelburne Day last weekend, which was a very great success, not the least. We had wonderful weather. It's a long list, but well worth my attempt to try to make sure I've covered everybody. Certainly the Rotary and the Business and Professional Association, who have a major role in sponsoring and organizing it. Our fire department, rescue squad, police department, veterans committee, tree committee, we're all in attendance. It's great to see that amount of volunteer involvement. Their booths were busy. Diana was, this Historical Society had a booth. Diana was involved, and we're not sure whether it was Rotary or SPBA, and Lee doesn't know either.
All of the above.
And not least, our photographer, our famous photographer, Lee Crone, who spent a very large amount of time on his day voluntarily
Glad to do it.
taking pictures, and we thank him for that. Mike?
I'd like to wish Jamie a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Jamie. Very nice of you to come on your birthday.
Public service.
Public service.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Indeed.
35 feels good.
Yeah, yeah. You don't look a day older.
And hold it.
Would you like to make a meaningful comment to mark that occasion?
No, thank you. Yeah, no, happy to be here and thankful for another birthday.
Thank you. Colleen?
I just had two. One of them was actually what you already mentioned about school, and busing. And we had addressed this at a meeting a few months ago about buses running or cars running the stop sign. And we had talked about the idea of approaching the police department and seeing what their thoughts were and outreach. And I don't know whatever happened to that. I have to say I'm ashamed that I didn't follow up on that.
Well, there's been an array of options and possibilities. I mean, we've looked into everything from the do-nothing option to a big flashing red and yellow light, which probably would not be thought of too highly by those who live right next to it. I believe that Paul Goodrich ordered and installed some larger, more reflective stop signs to see if that might help. Trim some tree branches back from stop ahead kinds of signs. Others have suggested that we should consider installing some of these newer stop signs that have flashing LEDs around them with a solar panel on it. They're about $1,000 a piece. So if you wanted to do all four sides of that intersection, it's at least $4,000, and not all the sides would have enough solar access to do it. It's an interesting situation because it's not like it just became a four-way stop last week. I mean, it's been that way for a long, long time. So why people run that is a real mystery.
We'd expressed some concern also, Lee, about people driving around, stop buses, as
Pass
if the
buses.
arm made no impression,
Yeah,
and as if
that's-
it were legal. And I think our concern ran to, didn't it, Colleen, a couple of cases,
Yeah.
one week
Yeah.
in a row back in the spring. So I'm assuming that the police department is aware and would probably be out quickly in any case that repeats to try to establish some kind of, some deterrence right off the bat for the school
Yeah.
year.
I imagine
Or-
they will be very present, at least at the start of the school year, to help motorists behave appropriately, shall
Yeah.
we say.
So the state used to pay for PSA at the beginning of the school year just to put out in the radio, and there was like flyers and newspaper ads just reminding people that school is starting and to be careful of buses. And then they cut the budget, and they cut that about 3 years ago.
Oh,
And so there really is an outreach, and if you don't have little kids at home, I think sometimes, I don't know, summer just slides into fall, and it's, and it does come as a surprise. And so it would be great if we did have some type of outreach just to remind people, those that we could reach. Whether it's
Yeah.
like, an announcement that we take out in the Shelburne News, and then maybe on Front Porch Forum.
Yeah, we
Would you
can
be able to do
certainly
that?
work on that
Yeah,
right away.
yeah.
Glad to do that.
So that was just one, and the other is just thank you very much for your well wishes. And my mother-in-law, which is the reason I didn't come to the meeting last week, is doing better at 85.
great.
She's
We're
still
pleased to hear
ticking.
that.
So she can continue to lovingly give me a hard time, as only mother-in-laws can do.
That's great news.
Yeah,
Glad to hear.
In the in-law apartment.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Lee?
Thank you. I too would like to thank everyone who helped out with Shelburne Day. It was a great day all around, great community event once again. Thanks to everybody who helped out with that. Roz is here, Dorothea's here, other folks were a part of that throughout the planning and the day itself. I also echo the concerns about school safety. Please be careful with children riding their bikes, walking. We now have the flashing beacon. Hopefully that will help with the crosswalk. It'll be a little tricky for a few days navigating through this site, but that will soon come to a close. We've asked the school to ask the crossing guards to try to keep the kids on the main sidewalks and not coming through the construction zone for a little while yet. The board had asked me for some specific updates on some other municipal projects that are underway, one being the Stormwater Advisory Committee. We've begun periodic meetings again, the goal being to return to this board later this fall with an updated ordinance. Some of the key changes that are being contemplated to try to address concerns raised are you'll likely see a recommendation that we phase in the stormwater fees over 2 or 3 years to give people time to get used to those fees, especially on the non-residential side. And also acknowledging that if non-residential users were going to hire engineers to work on stormwater mitigation on their own properties in order to qualify for credits, that will cost money also. So the theory being, try not to essentially double charge people right at the outset and give all parties, including nonprofits, a chance to phase into their budgets what these fees would be. And another key aspect of that is consideration of increasing the possible credits for agricultural uses and educational purposes, those that might benefit nonprofits the most and don't require engineering analysis to justify. Because there were concerns that although we're proposing a higher possible credit than any other municipality, the likelihood of actually earning the highest amount of credit seemed pretty slim. So we're trying to balance those needs between having to earn the fees to justify the work that needs to be done, but at the same time being sensitive to the financial implications for landowners. So working diligently on that. I wish I had as much to report on the fire rescue healthy living property. It's taken longer than they thought for healthy living to come to a landing on a prospective developer for that site, and we also have some input into that selection. So until that's done and they have a clearer contractual draft arrangement, the rest of the site analysis can't yet begin. I've been reminding them regularly of our timeline, that we really need to know enough of what we need to know by the end of this year so that that committee can in good conscience know whether to recommend to this board to put an item on the ballot for town meeting. So we're trying to keep that moving forward, but it's not entirely in our control.
Do we know what the holdup is? Do you know what's going on, or have a
I
sense
think it's
of?
just a selection process that, as we've witnessed in other arenas, sometimes takes a lot longer than you first anticipate. Whether
Cool.
it's who responded or whether they felt comfortable with those prospects.
What do you think is a reasonable window for being able to make a recommendation to the select board? Do you have an idea?
Well, I think the committee will need to come back here by end of year latest, because
But don't
that
we-
feeds into budget planning and preparation. It feeds into the warning for town meeting, whether this board feels comfortable with the knowledge we'll have then to even put that item on the ballot.
Okay.
I would think at the time you propose your final budget,
That's,
you know,
it's a big piece of that and needs to
Yeah.
be integrated into that
no,
if it's
because
going
it's
to
a
be.
major, you know,
So trying to drive that forward. I don't say that to blame anyone, but it's just the facts that it's taken longer than we'd hoped.
well, that's good to know, Lee.
Is there an RFP for the developer, or?
They,
you
White
have
and
it?
Burke for Healthy Living had issued an RFP.
Okay.
And then they solicited responses to that. I know they're down to an extremely short list, but nonetheless.
Okay,
Would a communication from the
that's what I was wondering too.
whole
Would it
board,
help
do you
to-
think, Mike, would that, and Lee assist?
I've been in close contact, but sure, that would certainly
Would it
help.
help you? I mean,
think-
if you think so.
I think it would.
Yeah,
With Eli or with Whitenberg?
I've been working directly with White and Burke since they're the
Maybe
contracted
maybe if you would
representative.
send a note to Eli.
sure. I mean, if the board's comfortable, I can sign it, you prepare it,
Sure.
just to indicate our concern and,
And- Sure.
and reconfirm the timing. The timing is really pretty critical.
I mean, I would say I'm also just concerned that whatever the outcome, we have opportunity to kind of present the issue to the town and to other community members and not feel pressed to
Absolutely.
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
suddenly have to make a recommendation
Right.
without sort of prepping,
Agreed.
Well, we'll, I'm sure, account for the possibility of this from Thanksgiving on, but that's not nearly a substitute for some understanding of the final form of the agreement, which is yet another matter.
Right.
Sure.
And much less certainty that it's gonna happen. So,
Yep.
why don't you put something
work on
together and that you think would be useful and helpful, and with
Yep.
the okay from my colleagues, I'll sign it on our behalf.
I think that'd be helpful. And as
Thanks.
Colleen notes, there's also an educational component to this that needs to ramp up and can't just
Right.
suddenly
No,
appear.
February.
We have to
No,
have
it's
some
been-
information to be able to.
Yeah.
it's been months enough. I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
Well, a
not
lot
easy.
happens in September, in their defense. I mean,
Yeah.
it's summer.
Yeah, I'm not
and
trying to
things
be
can sort of-
critical, just
Yeah.
Yeah.
informative.
Yeah.
Yep, fair enough. Okay,
So-
we'll re-engage
Right.
with them.
Okay, gang?
Good.
One other piece of the puzzle that's been discussed at some length in terms of bike and pedestrian access, there've been discussion about whether we could create a three-way stop sign at Church Street and Falls Road. We did have interns from the Regional Planning Commission do some pedestrian and vehicle counts at that intersection, accident analysis. As we anticipated, it doesn't come close to meeting the warrants, so we can't turn that into a three-way stop. So I just want to let you know, we did do the research on that, and things will remain as they are.
And we've communicated that to all
Yes.
interested
Yeah.
parties,
Yep.
including the group, and,
Yes.
Yeah.
So
thanks, Lee.
that's good for tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, Thanks, Lee.
Good for you, thanks. Any discussion? Hearing none. Next item is a request for waivers, of which there are two. Lee has recommended both for our approval. It's been our habit to do those without much detail and rely on Lee to sort of fill in the blanks.
Sure. Thank you. So we do have two requests before us. One is in the amount of, it's a late fee of $210.16, which the owner did pay, and they're hoping we will refund it. This was a peculiar case where a property was transferred very shortly before the tax bills went out. So it went out to the former owner, who forwarded it to the new owner, who didn't receive it in time to pay on time. They have certainly paid in full, and I believe it does meet the criterion regarding just that forwarding of mail when there's been a very recent transfer.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve the waiver of the late penalty, late payment fee in the amount of $210.16 with respect to the property at 20 Westview Drive, Mr. Tremblay, pursuant to policy 1801, section 6.
Second.
Jamie moves, Colleen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
And the other one, you've seen similar requests before. This was for a waiver of the homestead declaration penalty, if you will. The owner gave a fairly detailed personal letter regarding personal medical circumstances, and it clearly meets, in my opinion, the criterion related to that.
Move to waive the late penalty fee in the amount of $845 with respect to the property at 226 Eagles Rest Road, Mr. Bush, pursuant to policy 18-01, section 3.
Jamie
Second.
moves,
Second.
Colleen seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
The next item is a general overview of last fiscal year's budget, which Peter is here to provide us.
So as you know, our fiscal year ends on June 30th, and we're starting to do the year-end closing adjustments that we have to do. So there's still a lot of work to do before they get finalized, and that'll lead up to our auditors coming in October, where they will sign off on that and prepare the actual financial statements. So a lot of work to be done between now and then, but at least the board wanted a preliminary look at how we ended up the fiscal year that ended on June 30th for the town. I'm pretty confident in saying that we ended up with a positive results for the year in a number of areas. While there's still a lot of adjustments to be done, I'm pretty confident in saying that we will end up with a surplus, which will go to our fund balance and increase that as of year end. Just some of the highlights in the budget and summaries are online, so you can take a look at those if you wanted to look at some of the highlights of that. One of the most important issues is the property tax revenue. What can affect that are tax appeals, where taxes are reduced by appeals. There were none this year, so our tax revenues were pretty much on target for the year, which is good. Couple of other areas on the revenue side, the police department, you'll see their budgets are over what they had budgeted. A lot of that is for grants that they get during the year. They do special enforcement details, which are paid for by grants. We don't really budget for those since they're fully funded. We don't really know how much money we're going to get. But the police department's pretty active in looking for those where they'll do traffic enforcement, seatbelt checks, speed control, that sort of thing. So they had some revenue coming in for that, which was offset by corresponding expenditures for the officers that participated in those details. Another item, the police revenues also include dispatch revenues. Our dispatch revenues are probably going to be on target. We've got 1 quarter billing to go, but that should be on target. And they also did get a grant to replace their dispatch consoles in the dispatch area, again, to update technology, radio, communications technology, and that sort of thing. That was a fairly large grant of almost $200,000 and 100% paid for. So that, again, bumped up the police revenues, but on the dispatch side, you'll see it going over budget there for that purchase as well. The rescue revenues, you'll see those being under budget. That's because the new ambulance that was planned for arriving last fiscal year actually arrived this month, or actually last month, so that will be showing up in this year's budget. Again, that's being fully paid for by the billings and donations that Shelburne Rescue has. But again, it makes a little bit of a variance there between what we had expected, but again, no issues that came in on budget and just a timing issue there. Another highlight, legal expenses are right at budget, 60,000 budgeted, around 60,000 spent. That's certainly a bright spot from what we've seen in the past with that category. So again, no worries about going over and having to cut other areas to try to bring things in. So again, Lee's done a great job, I think, in terms of managing that expense since he took his role. Again, sort of following that, the manager's office, you'll see that's under budget. Again, that was budgeted for our prior town manager's salary and staffing. Lee consciously held off on hiring. That's now been done with Nini here this year. But again, not really knowing where we were with the town center project and all of that. One of the best ways to try to save money in a budget is if you have an open position, not to fill it, or at least to postpone it. And that certainly paid off so that the significant lower than budgeted expense in that category, which again helped to create the surplus. Other areas, the highway department, again, that's one of our bigger budgets. And again, I give credit to Paul Goodrich for managing that so well. He really keeps an eye on things, keeps things going, does the maintenance work and all of that, but he's always watching the budget, and his philosophy is he never wants to go over on his budget. And I think the results really show that. So again, thanks to Paul for the work he's been doing there. Our debt payments, you'll see, are a little bit lower than what we had budgeted. The reason for that was, I think probably it was last fiscal year where we had budgeted for some short-term capital expenditures, which we would do, maybe finance over 2 or 3 years rather than getting a longer-term loan for. Again, last year, our fund balance was looking pretty positive, so some of those items, capital items that we had planned on funding with a short-term loan, we didn't have to because, again, last year our fund balance was in good shape, so we actually funded those out of the budget, saving a loan that we would have to pay off over the next several years. So other than that, the debt payments are pretty much as scheduled from the offerings that we get with the bond bank and the different banks. The benefits, if you're looking at the summary page, the benefits look like they're over budget. That, again, is a transitional thing. Joe Colangelo, in his budgeting process, wanted to have the benefits budgeted by department. We transitioned. We used to have them all in one place. That's still a work in progress to move that out of that one section into the department areas. But I can assure you our benefits are going to be pretty close to being on budget, health insurance, dental, that sort of thing for this fiscal year. So that should be in good shape as well. So those are just some of the highlights. Again, we've got a lot of work to do, before this gets finalized, and the auditors take a look at it and come back with their results in the fall. But I'm pretty encouraged we ended up the year in really good shape. And just give our department heads a lot of credit. They manage their budgets very well, and I think that really shows in terms of the results, and we really have to thank them for doing a lot of the work to keeping things on and no real big surprises. So that's where we're at, but certainly more to come with as we work through the rest of the results here. I don't know if you have any questions at this point.
I have one question. It just says the fire department expenses, just the expenses were less than budget. Okay.
Yeah, and that's, you may remember John Goodrich came before the board a while ago for a major grant that they were looking at to upgrade their radio systems to, again, current technology. They didn't get that grant this past year. They've applied for it again, and they're waiting to hear the results in this fiscal year. So we budgeted for it again this year, but that's the main reason for the variance there. Some of that was also affected the Shelburne Rescue budget because they were part of that grant as well. So nothing spent, but no revenue either.
Got
So
it.
it kind of offset.
And then, sorry.
Go ahead, no, please.
One other question about the highways. What Mr. Goodrich was not able to pave this year, and does he feel like that percentage of roads that should have been paved that isn't? I mean, if we have another hard winter, how much farther does that set us back? Do we have any details about that?
My impression was that he pretty much paved the amount that he was expecting to. He didn't really cut back on that. If you look at the paving budget, actually we got a paving grant that actually allowed him to pave more than he had planned. So I don't think I think Paul pretty much likes to keep the paving on schedule and looks for other areas where maybe he can defer some storm drain maintenance or road shoulder maintenance, that kind of thing. So pretty safe to say I think that the paving was done on schedule. It does get affected by the cost of the material. Cost per ton went up, so that obviously can have an effect on how many miles you can do. But it's not something that Paul consciously goes back and cuts back on. He will pretty much spend that budget to whatever the amount is that he's allowed to.
Okay, I'm just trying to anticipate what might be asked for in December. But right now, you think that there is nothing that he's not going to be able to catch up on unless we get another hard winter?
Well, I think if you talk to Paul, he would always like more
He
in the
always wants
paving
more,
budget.
yeah.
So
Who
you'll probably
doesn't?
hear that again.
Yeah.
That's probably safe to say.
Yeah.
But it's nothing he consciously cuts back on. He will
Okay.
look at other areas certainly first before he would. And like I said, we did get a paving grant to do paving on Spear Street last year. That was grant funded, or most of it was grant funded. So
Okay.
And then we did get the grant this year to do Barstow Road. And we will be taking care of Harbor Road sometime soon. Getting pavers, they're all flat out. But it will.
grant funded too?
Harbor Road is not, but there was some shifting of funding around because the original project would have just paved the trenched area.
Right.
But to do it right, Paul, we'd really like to do the whole road, so we shifted some money out of, from the sewer grant to help cover the whole road and do it right.
Peter, on the couple questions. On the revenue side, the town clerk's revenue seems to be dropping significantly. Is that, what's driving that? Is that passport
I
fees
think it's
falling off or
primarily recording fees. I
recording
think.
fees just
Yeah, and
fell off?
And actually, there's a portion of those that get transferred into a records preservation fund. Like it's $1 a page, I believe, for recording fees that go into that. So that's an adjustment we'll need to be making.
Right.
I think that's primarily the variance there. Passports, I think they're over budget in revenue there. That's been pretty active. They've really doing a lot of passports in the office pretty much every day, it seems like, so.
And then on the expense side, public works, stormwater, are we deferring projects? How come we're not spending the money?
I think there may have been some uncertainty about, what
The ordinance or?
what the ordinance would, the impact of the ordinance and that. I would have to talk to Chris more in detail, but I think that was the primary reason,
Okay.
to try to get a long-term view of what the funding looks like and then to start align projects with that.
Yeah,
But you're right, that was an under expenditure.
Yeah, another complication also is that there was one major project we put out to bid, and when the state determined that their standards needed to be added into the project, it drove the bids sky high. So, but the state elements didn't actually need to be in the project, so Chris pulled those back out, reissued the RFP, so there's at least one major grant-funded project that probably would have been spent, but there've been these endless delays in cost escalation and whose standards really need to apply. So we're trying to keep the cost down, get these things done.
Well, there's room to say thanks a lot and to commend. It's always struck me, Peter, that you have an extraordinary command of this area, uniquely so, I think, in my experience. And once again, we benefit from it. I've got a couple of quick comments. One of the things that, in a sort of the story behind the story here, is that this was also a year of some significant transitions. We lost Bill in the Public Works, which was feared to be, and probably was to some degree, a loss of some efficiency and resulted in some outsourcing of tasks that he had managed that his replacement may or may not have, and we weren't sure whether his replacement would manage. That's an example, along with Lee's first first real, year. We had some pressures, as are understood and necessarily, on legal, as well as we had contaminated soils. So while the figures don't always reveal the degree to which this was well managed, I think it bears a comment now that this was not, in some respects, an ordinary, predictable year. And that says worlds about the quality of staff, your leadership, Lee, and your direction, Peter. And for that, we are quite grateful.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to deprive you of the last word, Jerry, but I just had a question. I'm sure I'm going to learn about this as the budget season approaches. But if I'm reading this right, you're anticipating we're going to be about 7% below budget?
No, I wouldn't want to give a percent at this point because we've got so many adjustments that we
Okay.
have to do, so.
But we're looking good.
Yeah, we will definitely end up with a surplus.
What happens, though, if, well, two questions. One is, it seems like a lot of this is expenses that will come back next fiscal year. Some of the expenses seem like they just didn't transpire this year. And does that then require, do we roll the funds over in those cases? Or how does that actually work from a budgeting?
We pretty much start from square one again on July 1st. But what happens with these pluses and minuses that you see on the revenues and expenses, they go to what we call our fund balance. So the town's budget operates as an entity under its own, separate from sewer, separate from water. So what's going to happen is these revenues, where they exceed the expenses, will go to what we call our fund balance, which at the audit that we did as of June 30th last year, we had a fund balance which is basically assets minus liabilities. What it comes, it's not a cash balance, but it's essentially their positive position. It's about $634,000. Our charter says we will try to maintain a 5%, a fund balance that's no less than 5% of our expenditures. And that's $600,000, about 6% of our expenditures. Charter also says that if you exceed that threshold, then you can spend money from that fund balance on projects that are in the capital improvement plan. So we may very well be looking at that and saying, are some of those capital projects that will be showing up on our capital improvement plan, which you'll be seeing in probably about a month, can those be funded out of that surplus?
I see.
So each department really starts with a fresh revenue and expense scenario each budget year.
Okay, great. That's helpful, thanks.
Are there any questions? Any discussion? Lee, do you want to add anything? And
No, again, thanks to Peter for his amazing hard work. It's been a great team effort all around.
pretty fantastic. I mean,
Could I add one thing? Only because we all would need to schedule, and if we're gonna do like the all-day meeting where we have all the departments come before us, which I think is probably the most time-effective and easy for us to coalesce all the information, can we think about scheduling that at least by the beginning of October?
Yes. We do have a tentative date of December 12, I believe. It was a Thursday, and we were waiting to see if that worked for everybody's schedules.
It won't
For the all-day?
line.
Doesn't work for you.
No,
No?
no. Wednesday or Wednesday.
It does
would.
work for me, but let's find something that works for
The 11th?
Unless-
The 11th?
the 11th.
Unless,
Or
you
the
know, my
5th.
being absent for a few hours is not a problem. I
Well,
can make
it's-
it part of it.
We're all here.
Yeah.
It's always tricky, but it's really helpful to be there.
Yeah,
for
no,
the
we
whole
should
day.
schedule it, Mike, to
What
convenience
about
you, I mean.
the 5th? Could you do
yeah.
it a week earlier? on
Wanna
a
go to the
Thursday?
11th?
Mike
Check with
teaches
Mary?
on Tuesday, Thursday,
I
right?
teach Tuesday, Thursday.
Yeah,
That's
so-
actually the very end, the beginning of exam period,
Right.
so
Oh.
that day.
Yeah.
so-
All right.
The 11th, no good,
No, that's all right.
maybe?
All right. If I'm, yeah, if I've got it, yeah.
The 4th?
The 11th's fine. Let's just do
11th's
it.
fine with me, and you
Pencil it
wanna,
in.
wanna go
Can we just
around,
go
we
ahead
can
and
check
just
with
do it?
everybody?
Sure.
And make
Is that
sure
okay
it's
with-
okay with
I think
Mary.
so,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
Any Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday will
yeah.
be fine.
Check with Mary.
That works for you, Peter?
Let's do it.
We'll follow up right away on that. So if that works, then everybody can know for your calendars.
Great. Thank you. Once again, really well done, Peter. Okay, the next item is a draft use policy for town facilities. We've had some material provided us as well. Lee has done some revision at some point today, which he's provided by screen. Is that the language?
And we can put it up on the screen. There are copies available at the table. However, it's most helpful. The general goal here was to blend the library trustees' policies with the town facilities policies into a single document, which we thought would be easier in terms of everybody's use and for consistency between facilities. As I understand it, I think the trustees are fairly comfortable with what we have proposed to date. We've made a number of adjustments, as you mentioned, as of today. We were also trying to get to a point of approval because the Historical Society wanted to know what they were essentially signing on to as well. And that's the next item on the agenda. So however is most helpful, we can put it up on the screen and roll
We should
through
just
it.
Work through it on the screen and do it in real time.
So just by way of background, we have had a use policy in place for a number of years. So this is based very much in part on that, but again, trying to fine tune it to meet questions that have come up, concerns that have arisen, and again, trying to blend so that we have one use policy for the whole town campus. So the highlighted areas are the latest breaking changes in the draft. In general, there's a statement that just says we're fortunate to have these facilities. We're glad to make them available for many types of uses and users. This draft would clarify that first priority goes to the town itself. So if there are potential conflicts in use, Select Board, Planning Commission, Recreation Department, whoever actually needs the facilities would have first crack at them. We've had a variety of fees and a variety of exemptions, and there have been questions raised about whether the exemptions are so broad as to exempt virtually everyone, or should we scale that back? On one hand, people pay taxes, they deserve to be able to use municipal facilities. On the other hand, it does cost money to build and maintain them, as we've learned quite clearly next door over the last year. So this proposal, and again, this can all be modified live, whether tonight or at another time, would exempt ourselves, of course, town departments, town staff can use these facilities, town-sponsored events, school district events, town-funded or recognized service organizations, and then regional and state agencies or committees. If Act 250 wanted to hold a hearing here, I would hope we would make it available to them as well. So maybe we should stop there,
Yeah,
see
let's
whether
stop
that
there.
is comfortable, makes sense.
A recognized service organization example.
I'm thinking potentially, for example, the Village Safety Committee that's been essentially a recognized committee. We've provided them with funding in the town budget. Not them, but we allow certain expenditures that meet their needs. That-
Business and professional association.
Business and
SBPA.
how far afield we go. I mean, currently, the policy, for example, I think specifies local condominium associations and all sorts of other entities, and it's purely a policy call how far afield we want to go with those fee exemptions.
So it's, the "or" there is inclusive to mean town-recognized service organizations?
Yes.
Okay. Not any recognized service organization. Who makes the call?
Good question. Because currently, it's a fairly open-ended, vague term, and so I think, and I say this without any criticism of any persons involved, but it seems like some of the requirements like fees have been inconsistently applied, in part because the policy was not all that clear. And again, I'm not suggesting we make this so ironclad as to cut everyone out, but it's just a good question as to who makes that call. What's a recognized service organization, what isn't?
When somebody is paying the fee, who are they paying it to?
Typically, there have been one or two people who've handled the bulk of the scheduling to date. Sue Maraska, one of the assistant clerks, has handled very much of it. The rec department handles primarily the downstairs area, the activity room, the gym. The library has handled its own affairs. And we're also working internally to clarify the scheduling, so it's just simple, easy, and clear for anyone who wants to use a space.
Do we have a scheduling software program that's universal, or?
We're looking into that,
Okay.
whether it's an expanded use of Microsoft Outlook or a separate standalone. But the goal is to have everyone involved in it able to see which rooms are available where and when, so that if you as a citizen want to use a space, you don't need to make 3 different calls to
Right.
3 different people.
So I have a question about the priority. It makes sense that priority is given to the town of Shelburne departments and committees. But then it's available on a first come, first served basis. Logistically, how does that work? Is it
So,
only available for the town to book up to a certain time, and then it's open to the public, whether residents or non-residents?
good question. So typically, to date, most of the town boards meet on a very regular basis. Planning Commission has a pretty fixed schedule, the DRB, this board certainly does. So those are semi-permanently locked into the calendar. When we had Stormwater Committee meetings once or twice a month, Water Commission meetings first Monday of every month. So those kinds of recurring known scheduling are essentially fixed in the calendar. If I'm not having a Water Commission meeting, I'll let someone know so that it frees up the room for someone else. So the first come, first serve then relates to essentially all those other times during the day or evenings when spaces are typically available.
Okay, so priority is really just given to basically our semi-permanent schedules for the functioning of the town, and then everything else really is just first come, first serve.
Right.
Okay.
If something came up hypothetically, like we had a special select board meeting in August, I think some shuffling had to be done to accommodate that so that this board could be here and that group that thought it was going to be here could be in the next room over.
Got it.
I've got a couple of comments, Lee. One, I want to be sure that the Peach Room is not subject to this policy, that it remains an administrative.
That is baked
Is that
into this
there?
draft
Yeah, that's
later
on the
on.
back.
Okay.
Good.
Reserved for
Sec-
town use.
Yeah. Second, I think the policy ought to be administered by the town manager. And where appropriate, as in some areas of scheduling and whatnot, delegated by him or her, in likely cases to Betsy and Kevin. But I really think this should be a town manager responsibility. There are several matters that could be arbitrary and inconsistent if not lodged in the same person, the same office.
Yep.
And you have a means of seeking our help and guidance such as it is. But I really think that the policy ought to be, the administration of the policy ought to be lodged firmly and directly in the town manager's office.
So perhaps somewhere in here, there ought to be just a blanket statement
I
that if
would be
questions
my
arise
suggestion that that relieves a lot of questions about who. And I think I would be personally comfortable if you were that we could rely on your judgment to delegate where you thought appropriate and as needed.
makes good sense. So moving right along into the responsibility, we've made some changes from the existing draft. This would ask that the contact person who makes the reservation actually be somebody who's going to be here. Apparently that's not commonly been the case. Again, not trying to be overly strict about it, but ultimately I'm responsible for the facilities, and I think I don't want to end up in an accountability problem where one person made a reservation, someone else used the room, there was damage, and each is saying they're responsible for it.
Exactly.
So if you're going to make a reservation, I think it's only fair that you should be part of the group that's intending to be present. And then it may be current practice, but it's not specified that you have to show some sort of ID in order to get the key from dispatch. Because again, we're letting people have the keys to the kingdom, and we're not here most of the time when those are happening. So just to have some level of accountability that who's having the key and that dispatch knows they're going to get it back.
Is there a way to modify that and just say, like, the person who reserved the room or their official designee? I'm just thinking, like, if we had someone who wanted to teach a knitting class, and then there was one class that they had somebody else teaching the class for them, and they weren't going to be there that night, but the class was still going to occur, or a quilting group or something like that, then it seems reasonable that there should be some mechanism that they can find a substitute and still have that be okay, even if they're not physically present.
Yeah, just designate a contact.
Yeah.
So we could have this say something like contact person or their designee.
Official designee. I mean, it almost goes against kind of what you're saying, that the person should be there, but I can see why it might not always be feasible.
I mean, as I'm reading this and kind of picking up on Colleen's suggestion, I just wonder if we might want to include some sort of proviso that the town manager or whoever is officially in charge may, in their discretion, allow or make decisions to allow certain types. I mean, you know, maybe there's a situation where somebody wants to delegate, and that if that's okay with if you feel comfortable that the person administering the policy feels comfortable or feels secure or assured, maybe there's a way to write something like that in.
Yeah, or
I'm not
like
sure I'd agree-
802
I'm not sure I'd agree
lacrosse.
there, because I don't think we should intervene with decision-making on the part of an organization who's determining who's their contact. No, I think there should be room for somebody being designated that night. Someone gets ill, someone has God forbid, an accident, I mean, there are all lots of reasons. But I think the strength of the requirement is that the town manager has an accountable person who's on site. And if that doesn't happen to be the current president of the organization, but a delegate, that's fine. But I think being on site and being official to the organization, not to us, is pretty paramount here. So I'm not sure I'd agree, Mike. I mean,
Okay.
except the town manager would have the wherewithal to pick up a phone or say, is someone in your group willing to assume that role? And would you please call your organizational head and have them contact me? I mean, the town manager can assist the process, but I'd be pretty wary of the town nominating anybody in a group to be a contact person, absent the person that was supposed to be.
No, I was just thinking of ways that the town manager could exercise some discretion.
I think
Yeah.
the suggestion at the beginning about administration of this policy shall ultimately be determined by the town manager.
Would
right?
cover
So
that.
that feels like it gives you enough
Covers it.
discretionary authority
Yeah.
to
I mean, if somebody called and
make
said,
that call.
I'm sick, I was the contact
Right.
person, I can't be there, but this other person will now be, of course, we'd say, thanks for
Yeah,
letting
yeah,
us
yeah.
know.
I want to leave that kind of
Yeah,
latitude.
yeah, yeah.
Are there limits, or any kind of activities or groups that would be denied access?
Always a good question. I know that typically probably not, but you never know. I mean, we wouldn't want somebody demonstrating fire in this room,
Right.
for example. Not that anyone might do that. Certain kinds of uses, we just spent a lot of money to renovate historic town
Right,
hall,
I'm
refinish
thinking
the
about that in
floor.
particular.
There may be some uses that aren't fully compatible with the
high
longevity
heel
of that
tango
building.
group.
Right. It's one thing if you're contra dancing in soft-soled shoes
Right.
or socks,
Right.
but yeah, the high-heeled tango may not be,
Yeah,
may
okay.
need to
Great
find
too.
another place.
Yeah.
So I think we're trying to be welcoming, but at the same time have some reasonable bounds that we do need to be responsible for our own buildings, and we can't be everything to everybody.
Okay.
And we have to be sensitive to the political, socio-political realities of the day.
That too.
I mean, the time will come
Yep.
when we get a letter or a phone call, and there may well be an issue of whether that's an appropriate use of town property.
Yeah.
And I think, following up on your comment, that if Lee is the pronounced responsible party, he then has the option of coming to the select board
Yeah, I'm
and
comfortable with that.
sharing
Me
that.
too. I would
it-
prefer not to try to overregulate this thing.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Too prescriptive with it. You
yeah.
can start to go down a major rabbit hole.
Yep.
No, we'd have 10 pages.
Right.
Yeah, we're trying not to do that.
Yeah.
Next major change, and this again is part of the blending of library and town. To date, the town has prohibited alcohol in its own facilities. Libraries have a certain level of statutory independence, and they have tended to allow alcohol. My suggestion for consideration would be that in the historic town hall and library, we consider allowing it, but only if there is a licensed caterer serving, and we become a named insured on a liability policy. And the reasons for that relate simply to liability and alcohol. The easy answer is just no alcohol, period, but I could see the likelihood of somebody wanting to rent the old town hall for a wedding reception
wedding,
and use
sure.
the downstairs,
Yeah.
and wouldn't it be nice to serve
Yeah.
wine or beer?
Yeah, and the only other thing I would say is I think it needs to be caterer or bartender. Because caterers, no, because if somebody was having a wedding reception there and they need to hire a bartender with a bartending license, and they're not a caterer, it's a bartending license.
It's a licensed caterer. That means they hold the license.
Excuse me, Ruth? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I'm sorry. So it's kind of complicated. The wording is complicated because it's in a specific library-related ordinance with the state. So it is a licensed caterer. So that means that the caterer holds the alcohol license, and then the person that they bring in to dispense the alcohol is licensed with the state, has gone through state training. So you write it that way. If you start using words like bartenders, then that means people think that they can bring in their own alcohol and serve it without the license, without the insurance, with all these other things. So the licensed caterer is specifically in the state ordinance.
And I understand where you're coming
Right.
from. I do.
Right.
I understand where you're coming from. What I'm saying is if there was a wedding reception and they weren't hiring a caterer, if they just said, nope, we're going to bring our own food, it's going to be a potluck, or we're getting stuff from Bluebird Tavern, and they just want to hire just a licensed bartender, they can do that. It's the same. So can we just look at that? I think that it's at least
can look at that.
worth looking
I
into.
think we're
You
both
can look at the
saying
wording.
the same
Yeah.
thing.
I
We're
don't
not
like the
telling-
word barkeeper, but yeah.
We're not telling
It's a
people they can't
bartending
bring their own
license, though.
food. We were using that phrase for consistency with what I understand to be the state law regulating alcohol. The caterer could end up just sending a bartender. We're not saying they have to cater the whole event.
But it might just be a licensed bartender who is reserved for just their bartending service. And that's it. It's not,
Right.
the person's not a caterer.
Are they separate licenses?
Yes, they're separate licenses. So, for example, like if I were to have an event in my clinic, I can have just Daedalus have a licensed, it's just a licensed bartender. I'm not hiring Daedalus, I'm just hiring their licensed bartender. So it's a different license. And they go through like the same training, and maybe there is something in like this, the state law that the library board of trustees has to pay attention to. But as far as our reasons for the town hall and the possibility of having, you know, like a 60th birthday party or a wedding reception there, if somebody wanted to just bring in their own dishes and have a licensed bartender, because I agree, I don't think people should just bring their own alcohol and have that type of get together at the town hall. But having a licensed bartender with the required insurance, I think is important. Just the wording, I think, is critical.
If we were, with your indulgence, Lee, Ruth, if we were to move tonight eventually to approve this policy in concept, which is not a prediction, just a possibility, would you be, with the instruction to Lee that he examine this, in which case we may have to have twice the sentences? One, yeah, would that be acceptable to you?
Yeah, I don't, the wording is not, I mean, the technical wording is not that thing, but I do want to clarify that the only way that alcohol, my understanding is the only way alcohol can actually be served over there is under the state ordinance that regulates the serving of alcohol at libraries and museums.
Because it's public property.
Because it's public property. It's a town government. So what that means is that however the ordinance goes, it has to align with, however our ordinance goes, it has to align with that state ordinance. It's not that there is an exception to town hall because it's not under a library event. Does that make sense?
Does the state ordinance specify it only can be a licensed caterer, or it could just be terminological that
Okay,
licensed?
don't ask me because I'm not a lawyer. I don't
Okay.
want to.
So we just need some clarification around that issue.
It's actually very vague because we originally had the ordinance, so you guys actually had already passed an alcohol ordinance. I guess you don't know that. The trustees, I think it was in 2015, the state made this possible. And the trustees went ahead and put together an ordinance that included all possible ways that you could serve alcohol, which was, sorry, a caterer, it's just wine and beer. A caterer, a private event where the library director and a trustee held the license, and the town was holding the insurance. So the library director and a trustee both went and did the licensing. And then the third option actually was bring your own. Because all of those, the ordinance, the state ordinance is flexible enough that all of those options were possible. So the select board went ahead and said, yes, this would be something they were willing to authorize. So we have not actually used it because we weren't in the building very long, and nobody wants to drink anything over there at the field house. So because we're now revising all of this, we wanted to do something that everyone felt comfortable with. And I think the trustees, there's been a degree of discomfort with the idea of the library director bearing any responsibility, anybody bringing in their own alcohol. So we're focusing on the idea that it's externally provided by someone who's bringing their licensed person, operating them through the town. I don't know how you word it, basically.
Should the policy you mentioned on alcohol, should that be incorporated into this? Where does that live? Is that
Okay, so yeah, so
a trustee
basically,
policy?
yeah, we have two policies.
Okay.
Lee's like, we already talked about this
I
morning.
just want to make sure when
Yeah,
someone reads
so-
this, they understand there's a broader
Right, there's
universe
a,
of
okay, so I don't-
governance around it that
Yeah, because why wouldn't that be included in
Right.
should be,
So I
right?
think
I
some
mean, I think it'd be
property.
helpful to.
Yeah, I think the reference to the state requirements, would it be
Well, it is
acceptable?
somewhere.
I'm sorry. Would it be acceptable, Colleen, if it turns out that for purposes of public use, caterer is the correct term? and
If it's
not-
the correct term,
Yeah.
I just don't think it's
Yeah, we should.
inclusive.
Yeah,
Right.
so
Yeah, be
we
glad to
would
research
ask you.
that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's a good question, because the library has its own, has its alcohol policy, because we have to, for this to work. And then the town had approved that alcohol policy. So I don't know if we should do another round of this after we figure out the wording. trustees can then fix the wording of theirs, and then we can bring it back for final for that one. Would that way we'd be sure to have a policy plus this?
That's
Is
consistent,
that,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and I could be
Makes-
completely
does
wrong,
make
but
sense.
I've done a lot of research into trying to figure out these type of events, and this is my understanding. But I could be wrong,
Well,
but I think it's at least worth looking into a little bit more.
Sure.
Oh, really
Glad-
good
glad to do
point. I
that.
mean, we'll ask Lee to make a point
Sure.
of sorting it out, yeah.
Does the library alcohol policy apply to the town hall space or just
It'd
the
be our
library
space,
space?
No.
it's town space.
I think theirs would just be the library. This proposes to cover
Right.
both
I see.
buildings,
That's the challenge. Yeah, okay.
All buildings,
just those two.
okay.
It would not otherwise allow,
Right.
we could expand it to others, but we're going from no anywhere, except only in the library, to thinking maybe allowing it there. I mean, my take is, again, it's a nice space over there. It might lend itself to various events, but if people want alcohol, there are plenty of other places they can have it. We don't have to necessarily allow it here. And I'm not a prude, but I'm just thinking of liability and appropriate uses of public space.
Peach room would be a wonderful tasting room. Right.
Indeed. But we'll research this one and come back to you with.
So now, sorry, Leah, not to belabor the point, now I'm just a little confused. Where does it specify that this policy only applies to those two buildings?
It just says may
Well,
be served in the library or town hall
It should
only.
probably say only in the library or town hall.
Okay.
Yeah.
And only
Yeah, that's
if
a good
served
point.
by.
Okay. All right.
That would help clarify that. Good question.
I think it should be more liberal.
Served.
Well, it says in the library or town hall.
Yeah,
So-
it seems clear to
Now it
me.
will say
Okay.
only in there
All right,
Oh, okay.
fair enough.
to
Okay,
help
good
streamline
point.
that.
Okay, let's keep moving.
Moving, we currently have this certificate of insurance requirement. It can be waived by the town manager. I think we'd all agree that if the proverbial quilting club is coming in, they don't need to provide a certificate of insurance. If somebody's having a much larger type of event next door, we might indeed want to have that. Facilities and fee schedule, again, trying to harmonize reasonably the fees between Shelburne or non-residents and businesses, and adding in who the contact will be for reserving each of those spaces. Again, just trying to keep this clean and neat and easy. The
Are those
rest of
current-
it,
Are those
sorry?
current fees that we're reflecting, or are they?
these
adjusted
are
upward
pretty
for-
close to current
okay.
fees. In a few cases, we've adjusted some, maybe raised them a little, but they're pretty close to.
Okay.
There's nothing dramatic about
Right.
these fees that's significantly different.
Are those representative of other public spaces in the area and surrounding towns?
It's a good question. It's all over the map. Some
Okay.
charge less, some charge more.
Mhm.
We're trying to find a reasonable middle ground.
Okay.
And again, if we find they're way off base, we can adjust these at any time. Then we just have a little bit of clarity added at the request of the rec department with regard to town beach and how those stickers and fees are distributed. And then adding in the town hall. So we've covered the primary changes. This is generally very similar to the existing policy. And whether we're at a point that we can approve it in concept or at least agree we know where we're headed with a few tweaks, we're just trying to bring some sense of forward motion since people are clamoring to reserve space. Historical Society, again, wanted to know what they were getting involved with, if you will.
I'd be comfortable moving this forward as proposed in concept, subject to the library trustees' final review of the document and confirming the caterer statutory reference to make sure that's broad enough.
And adding in a
Before
blanket.
I think this looks good.
Yeah.
Me too, I
You
want to
okay
be
with
sure
that?
we specify town manager in
Yeah, we'll add in a
that
blanket
general
statement in
sense.
there.
Yeah, but I'm quite comfortable as well with the concept.
Thumbs up.
And I think probably our direction to you ought to be adequate tonight, wouldn't it?
I would think so.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Come back at the next meeting with the results of that research. And are there any questions, any discussion? Dorothea?
I just have a suggestion, that maybe to make it easier for people who are trying to find the right space, that capacity, room capacity, and maybe if there is something that's just totally not appropriate, like the activity room is great for things that are a little sloppy, and there's a children's room in the new library, but just having an idea of what the capacity of each room would be so that people don't book inappropriately would be helpful, I think, to
I
the
think,
public.
Dorothea, that was one of the, there was some discussion of that, and I think the idea is that in the decision-making about accepting reservations, the question will be asked, does the capacity of the room align with the demands of the organization?
Yeah, I just think
Yeah.
it's easier for the public to kind of.
It probably would be helpful to have a handout at some point, a general handout for the
Yeah.
public that might summarize this and give some mapping about where these are, where to park. There's probably a little bit of a one-pager that we could do that would help people understand.
Because you're expanding quite a few different options, and people might not be accustomed to the numbers of people. Yeah, it's just as helpful to the public, I think.
Yeah.
Great
Yeah,
idea.
We'll try to add in something that's helpful without risking, for example, having to get the fire marshal in for every
Exactly.
room to have a legal
Yeah.
capacity.
Right.
But recommended, smaller room, bigger
Yeah.
room, some kind of generic. I think that's a great
Yeah.
idea.
Dorothy, hey, David?
Since you're directing basically Lee at this point to delegate who is responsible for reservations for each space, I'm kind of curious what you're envisioning is the disposition of the contact for the town hall spaces. Because I want to reiterate, to me, this is a town building, it's not a library building, and so I just would like to see how that is reflected in who is going to be administering that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we all recognize that fundamental distinction that it is a municipal building, it's a town building. Final decision hasn't been made whether the library would take that on scheduling or we would do that in the manager's office or potentially the rec department. We're still trying to work on that internally just to find a reasonable division of labor, but we will certainly, I think everyone's very clear on that. Thank you.
Would the sentence we talked about in the beginning sort of govern that, though, right? Ultimately, town manager decides scheduling issues, right?
If there's a
If that's a sentence
question or
we're
a
talking
conflict or
about
some
adding, which I
other.
thought we were, right?
And I guess what I'm saying is that basically enables the town manager to give it to the library to administer, and I'm against that. Because to me, it's still a town building.
I don't think any of us would likely disagree, David, but I think that the change here is to lodge in the town manager
I understand that.
the absolute decision-making. And without anticipating differences of opinion or inconsistencies, we're providing for that possibility, should there be, and furthermore for recourse to the board if there are really issues of some philosophical difference. But I think we've made very plain in all of the communications that the town hall is a town property and different from the library proper. So, but I think we've got to recognize we don't have extra folks for these responsibilities. These are the head of a rec department and the head of the library, and it's an additional burden in both of their cases. So we got to be careful about how we distribute the responsibilities, and that's the decision that we've suggested Lee should make on his own terms.
Maybe it would be solved by just scheduling software ultimately,
And
and maybe it's
ultimately,
a
I
budget
think Mike's
discussion
point is
in
probably
a couple
what's-
months when we sort
Yeah.
of, you've mentioned this, right?
Mike's point
You
is
just
probably going
mentioned
to
it
govern
earlier.
David at a point in time when we get it, because it's considerable staff time.
But David, I think your
Yeah.
point is well taken, and if there's a confusion that you're concerned about, then you're probably not the only one. And I think that at least where I sit and being here for the last 5 years, it was always very clear that the town hall was separate from the library and that the town hall was under the jurisdiction of the town. When the last time I talked to Betsy Sablicki about this, I didn't sense from her that she thought that it was any type of additional burden to do scheduling for the town hall, but maybe things have changed since then. And maybe this will all be resolved with some software. But I think it's well taken, and thank you for mentioning it.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion? Any other comment? Are you
So we'll come
comfortable with
back and
what you've
review the
heard?
final policy
I have
whenever
very,
it's ready
very clear
for
thoughts,
the board's
Right.
review. Okay.
direction.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. The next item is the lease of space in Historic Town Hall for the Historical Society. Everyone has been provided a copy of the final draft license. Some of us are still calling it a lease, but it's called a license. Would you, Dorothea, want to introduce the society?
Well, I did see the draft, I just, and I sent it around to our board to give some input. And I think the thing is, number 6, the $25 a month, I know this sounds a little nitpicky, but it seemed that, we're only gonna be there about 10 hours a week, and that's sort of on the outside, because, it depends. I mean, as our programs grow, hopefully we'll have more volunteers who will be scanning stuff, but at the most right now, I don't think I could even, man the place more than 10 hours for that. So our computer, we'll have one computer, desktop, and that's about it when we get there. So my husband, who is great with figures, we keep a computer going all the time at our house because he needs sometimes to get up in the middle of the night and look at patient scans very quickly. So he has a battery backup that gives how much kilowatt is used for that. So he calculated tonight that he spends for 24/7, $10 a month for that computer to be on. Roughly, he said, boosting up about 118. So we were hoping more like $15 for our use of electricity. And then sort of assessing that as we, grow, hopefully, to having more volunteers and more student interns and maybe have more time that we're actually sitting in there and using, and maybe even more equipment. But at this point, that's all we'll have is a desktop computer, a monitor, a scanner, and we'll turn that off. We have no reason to keep it going when we're not there. So I know it sounds like a small thing, but for our budget, our membership right now, we take in about $1,200. So with the insurance and that's eating up at least a quarter of what we take in. So it's fair, but we're just wondering if we could go to $15 for the electrical. The other thing is, we are getting another quote for our insurance. I sent one quote to Lee from, we went to Titus, and they got a quote from Co-op. We got another, Stuart went and spoke with Peter about different particulars that we might need, and we got another quote. It is significantly different in the amount, but very close in the alignment. So we're almost ready to get that insurance. We'll definitely make that decision after we're kind of nailed down with the license, just to let you know. And as I was sitting here thinking about the usage of the space, something came up to my mind. I was envisioning a wedding and bridesmaids and folks getting dressed downstairs, and what if somebody who's using that other space does damage to our belongings? I'm wondering about the insurance. Is it going to be town insurance? Is it going to be our insurance? That might be a point that we might need to work out. And hopefully it will never happen. Hopefully we'll protect it, and we'll put a sign to say, no food and drink past this point and all that we can do. But, things do happen, makeup goes flying and that sort of thing. So, I'm just a little concerned that there might be some friction point, maybe if something happens with a user of the flex space and that space, something happens to our exhibits. But we'll have to work that out as it comes. We will be insured, but and you'll be insured, I'm sure, for the uses of people using the space too, so in case something drastically happens to our exhibits. We are gonna be trying to do, much more quality exhibits as our money, as our membership grows, as we get grants. So some of these boards that we plan to do, might be a little pricey, so we want to make sure we protect those. But otherwise, I think we're fine with the changes that we saw this week. That was the only comment that I received from the board, was that they were hoping to go down to $15.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you.
I'm okay with the 15. I think it's more than the computer. It's the lights, it's the heat, it's
HVAC,
everything,
the
yeah.
split
So it's
unit,
more
yeah.
than just a computer running, but in the spirit of the long-term partnership and what the Historical Society contributes to the town, I'd be very comfortable. Going with 15, we can reassess it if we decide it's just disproportionate in the broader space.
Yeah, I feel the same way. What are your thoughts about liability of leasee for damages?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would just say, look at section 9, and
It's
that sort
covered,
of speaks
yeah.
to,
Yeah, we can't, I mean,
Where
that's
that
part
stands.
of the ongoing effort with a shared space is.
Right.
We're not trying to be flip, but we can't be liable for
yeah.
displays or exhibits. We'll have to hope that people trust it, but that's what their insurance will be for.
Right.
I'm going to second those two comments, Dorothea, because the utility includes heat, and we certainly wouldn't want to turn it on and off when you were there. So there's some it's a fixed cost, and you remember we said some time ago that we were uncertain about how to actually calculate this. At this point, we have no idea what the overall facility is going to cost. And that we were quite willing to revisit this at a time when we had a much better idea. I don't have any issue with dropping it to, did we say 20?
I said 15.
Oh, 15.
I'm a real tough car
Drives a hard
bargainer,
bargain
let me
here.
tell you.
Yeah.
Well done.
Boy,
Yeah,
I
I
don't
guess we
know.
were.
I wouldn't want to buy a home from you, Dorothea.
No, we gave ours easily.
But
And,
if you're okay with that, and
we're
if
okay with that.
if
Yeah,
the
I guess-
society can
yeah.
tolerate what you've heard tonight is something short of absolute approval, but a very definite approval in concept of the use policy, I don't think any of those issues would apply directly to the society. We are anxious, as everybody knows, to conclude this license because you have every expectation of being able to plan on what Ruth has just told us is going to be an opening here pretty shortly.
We are hoping, as soon as we get the okay and
Yeah.
our insurance is in place, to have at least a small exhibit available for the opening. That is the goal.
So if you're okay with what you've
I
heard
am.
about the policy, although we'll make every effort to make you aware of any changes from here, and if everybody is okay with dropping that to 15, and we're hopeful we can approve that tonight, so you can be a legal tenant or licensee. I'm not sure what you get called. Is there any other discussion, Colleen, about the license?
No, I agree with everything that's been said.
No, I'm good.
Mike?
I'm comfortable with this.
No, I'm good. Would you like a motion?
Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Move to approve the license agreement between the Shelburne Historical Society and Town of Shelburne as presented, subject to the modification of Section 6 to $15 per month for utilities.
Second.
Moved by Jamie, seconded by Colleen. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for coming. We appreciate what you do. We're welcome licensee, you know. The next item is the Tree Advisory Committee, Emerald Ash Borer. I'll have a very quick introduction to this. As many of you may also have had the experience, there are placards placed on ash trees in various town locations. The two things that struck me were, when I talked with the committee at Shelburne Day, were one, how many ash trees there are. There are a whole lot of them. and two, how effective that placard was in describing the condition and where we are in the process, which obviously the plague has accelerated. It appears it's on our doorstep more so than not. And to the extent that we need to start thinking about, especially in budget terms, about what we're going to be able to do with what is a significant number of trees in the school here, right outside. I wanted to be sure that you had the opportunity to come and update us and give us some thoughts about where things stand now and what you see in the near future. So go to it.
Hello. That was quite an introduction. I'm not sure what more I can say, but I will. Gail Henderson King. I have several members from our committee here tonight. David Hall, our tree warden, and vice chair, Jan Gannon, secretary, Ann Milosorov. And the only person we're missing is Todd, our comedian, but I'm sure he's watching. So to give you a quick update on where we are with Emerald Ash Borer and the ash trees in Shelburne, we received a grant, as you know, from the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program this spring for purchasing 2 iPads to continue doing our tree inventory in town road rights-of-way and on town properties, which we started back in 2014. We did not have our own iPads. We were borrowing them from the Urban and Community Forestry Center. So now we have 2 here in town. We've just started doing inventory. We're only focusing now on just inventorying ash trees in town road rights-of-way and on town properties. So that's where we are. We're hopefully going to get that work done this fall. It might have to go into the spring, but our goal is to get it done this fall. And we, also as part of that grant, we will be putting together an Emerald Ash Borer management plan. And actually on Thursday, we're going to a UVM class to pitch having a student group help us with pulling that document together this fall, that hopefully they would help us finish our inventory and then help us pull together this management plan. There's a bunch of management plans out there right now that various communities in Chittenden County and in Vermont have done, so it's not like starting from scratch. They don't have to recreate the wheel, but they need to cater the wheel to us here in Shelburne. So that's our goal, is hopefully that'll get done this fall. Hopefully we'll get a group of students interested in doing such a thing. And the goal is that that would be done by the beginning of December, which is when that semester ends. And we will be requiring that the students come and give a presentation to our committee and the select board of that final plan. So that's where we are. As part of the inventory that we're doing, those lovely tags that you're referring to, we've had, I don't know, 500,000 of them printed. A lot. 500? Okay, thank you. And the idea is every time we find an ash tree that's on town property or in a town right-of-way, we're stapling that on so that at least people can start seeing where all these ash trees are. The Emerald Ash Borer doesn't really care whether it's a green ash, a white ash, or any other kind of ash. It's eating them all. So we're trying to tag as many as we can that are on town property.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question? Is the goal
Sure.
to track potential loss of ash, or just to know where they are so we can track movement of ash borer?
Well, hopefully in the management plan, what we're going to do is identify, the Emerald Ash Borer is going to affect them one way or another.
Right.
The goal is the ones that are in good shape that we would like to keep, we need to start inoculating them fairly quickly. Because even though it hasn't been found here in Shelburne, it's probably not far away if it's not already here. So,
We're in, it's been confirmed
David,
in
you want to
Bristol.
introduce yourself?
Oh, Dave Hall, tree warden. It's in Bristol, it's confirmed, which is not that far away. Grand Isle County, it hasn't been confirmed as far south as Milton yet, but last week got confirmed in 2 sites in Alberg. So odds are it's here. And there's a lot of people that are out there looking for it, but it's the luck of the draw where you actually find it. We've had several instances this year, including myself. I had a tree on the ground, and I went, oh, and I went through the Vermont Invasives, sent them a bunch of pictures, and they confirmed that I was too eager, which I was really kind of glad that I wasn't the first one to find it in Shelburne. But we've had other instances where people are concerned, and we send them through to the Vermont Invasives and let the experts from USDA, Department of Agriculture, Forest and Parks, they have a whole team of people that are just focused on it and know, pretty much instantly what something is.
But the goal of the management plan is to be able to identify, hopefully by the time that document's done, we'll have our inventory done and we'll be able to have an idea of where are the trees that we need to inoculate, where are the trees. If a tree is already declining, we're not going to probably recommend that be inoculated, but that we probably would recommend that gets removed sooner than later. Or a replacement tree put near it and then eventually get that taken down. Because one of the things with emerald ash borer is once it has killed the tree is very, very difficult, more dangerous than a regular tree to take down because it will splinter and shatter in really awkward ways and make it very difficult for the tree professional trying to take it down as well as anybody else.
Which
in the
increases
area.
the cost.
Right.
So
So that's our overall goal, and as Jerry was suggesting, one of the things that we're hoping to be able to do is have that plan done so that when we come in for budget season, that we can have some idea of
real costs.
real costs of what we would like to be able to start doing. One of the things we want to do this fall is we've already identified some key ash trees that we already know about, some right here on the town property, some over at the parade ground, and some on School Street. School Street's going to be a huge disaster. I mean, there's trees lining all along the school property that are ash, and there's probably no way that we can interplant. There just is no room, so it's going to be a matter of taking them down and having to replant. Williston has already started doing this in their communities, and I have friends who live in some Williston neighborhoods, and it's pretty dramatic. They've gone in and taken out entire street trees in neighborhoods and are going back and replanting to help prevent this from getting any worse. So that's our goal. That's where we are with the ash trees.
I've got 2 questions, Gail, which really take the form of requests. One, we have a considerable open space inventory, and I think it would be very important for the 2 committees to get together, yours and Natural Resources, and discuss what the ramifications are of this disaster, because we have a whole lot of acreage that no doubt is going to be affected, some of which is not town property per se. That leads me to the second request. I'm hopeful that the management plan will address the interface of private ownership and public ownership, and answer questions like if a private owner wishes to get to be part of the town program, either as gratis or by payment. What is going to be our position of private owners who happen to be a foot away from the town right away, but in a location that puts at risk lots of other trees? I wouldn't want, I'm hopeful that you will be able to at least introduce the discussion of what does a community do, beginning with its town property and practice, to encourage or in any case assist private property owners. I mean, given the nature of our town and its tree feature. So I very much encourage meeting with the NRCC and specifically talking about open space, because that's sort of a reservoir of a problem, you know. And
Well, those are very good, very, very, very good questions. And yes, we've already thought about it. And yes, we've already met with the Natural Resources Committee and
fantastic.
gone over this. They meet the same night we do. We're the wild ones in terms of making lots of noise. They're the quiet ones next door. But we have met with them and talked about this, so they are aware of it. And we are
great.
trying to keep them up to date on what we're doing. You know, we told them that we're not doing anything on those open spaces, but yes, they should probably be aware of it. The other thing that we are doing is this month at our regular meeting on September 11th, we will be hosting a Identify Your Ash Tree seminar that will be held with an expert from the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program. We've had a lot of requests of, you know, what does ash trees look like? We don't know if we have an ash tree on our property or not. So the idea is to be able to help people with identifying what an ash tree looks like and start educating people on what the issue is with these
Great.
trees.
That's super.
So we're trying to do as much as we can with what we have for resources, and that's
Will
where.
you actually produce a map of the town and
Yes,
You
we're-
can
well-
access it online.
Oh, you can?
Right.
Great.
Through,
Yeah, maybe I can explain a little bit. On the iPads actually has a data collector program,
Oh, I
and
see.
so what we do is we're able, it's a mapping program. We're able to stand and click on our location, identify the tree, put in information about the tree, and that, all that data then gets uploaded onto the state's database, and you can then, any of you can go out onto ANR's website for their mapping, and you can click on the town of Shelburne, you can click on the tree layer, and you
Oh,
can
great.
pull up and see.
I know exactly how to do that. Perfect. Thanks.
Yes.
Great. I'd like to see that.
with the open spaces, one of the things in there is that the Natural Resources has overall management plans in place for a lot of those. What our management plan is going to be is for roadsides and public area spaces that are actively used. One of the, in some of the natural resources management plans that I've reviewed, it's basically, it's a wooded area. We're going to do minimal maintenance of it. And at this point, if we tried to go and clear out every ash tree in town, we would, it's unaffordable.
Sure.
So we got to bring our risk management in here is what's most risky. And also, the overall plan is that, like the American chestnut and the American elm, some ash trees they're finding have some resistance. So if we clear cut everything, we'll never be able to know what ones have resistance.
So you'll have some kind of risk-reward factor when you come, maybe in anticipation of budget, where the understanding is nature's going to take its course in some cases.
Right.
And, yeah.
We're
And-
hoping to be able to figure out some system to be able to assess.
That's really super.
Whether
Or
the
steal
tree.
somebody else's that they've already developed.
Right. Exactly.
We have no shame.
Yeah.
No, we will pilfer and use from other sources,
But if-
already done.
If I can throw out one thing back to Jerry, is that there's been discussion, some states, and I'm not sure if Vermont has done it yet, some states have set up a revolving loan fund directed at homeowners faced with the expense of dangerous ash trees on their property and not being able to come up with that upfront cost, but maybe being able to pay it back over a series of years. As I said, I'm pretty sure Michigan has done that, possibly in New York State, but that's something to consider as a way of helping our
That'd be a real
residents.
community service to let people know about those kinds of potentials and.
Well, we got to fund it somehow.
Yeah.
So I'm throwing that back to your budget area of consideration is, do we have access to some funds to set up a revolving fund?
Well, I think that will be something that hopefully we'll be able to approach, and when we come in at budget time, be able to have some suggestions
Yeah.
and some recommendations for moving forward.
Any question, Colleen?
The inoculation's funded, correct, for this budget year? I
We-
thought we did.
There's money, I mean, there's a tree conservation line item. We gotta figure out.
How you
yeah.
prioritize those dollars.
We gotta figure out the
It
prioritize
was an
it.
included activity, but I don't know on the scale that now we're confronting, but
Right. We do have funds for this year as part of our tree conservation line item, and we're hoping, as I said, that we've already identified some key trees that we do want to keep, and we'd like to at least start those this fall before the inventory's done. We know the inventory will probably identify other trees, but we'll just have to see how far those dollars can go, given what other things need to be done as well.
Understood. So likely a need for additional inoculation funding
Right.
next
Correct,
fiscal year.
and
Okay,
inoculation is not a one-time cost.
okay.
You know,
It's recurring.
It's a recurring, yeah.
It's
three-part series. or
been every other year. I'm hearing 2 to 3 years is now, I've heard that through several reliable sources. Somebody threw out 3 to 4 years, and I've only heard that from one place. So as the population peaks, it eats all its food and doesn't have any place to go. So 80 to 90% of the ash will be gone from an infested area in the next 10 years. So then you don't have as much food, you don't have as much problem. Hopefully, you're looking at maybe a 10 to 12 year cost for inoculation, but is that every 2 years or every 4 years?
Got it. It's
So
a decades-long problem.
it's not just
Yeah.
boom, you're done.
Yeah.
Got it.
And it's also dependent upon the size of the tree. And for example,
Correct.
across from the entrance to the Shelburne
Supermarket.
Supermarket complex, if you're coming out of that complex, it's directly in front of you is a big, beautiful, huge ash that we would like to keep. And so that one is one that we've identified that we want to inoculate this fall. But the cost of that one's probably going to be considerable compared to the ones on the parade ground or the ones even out here, because it's just bigger, and they base it on the size of the tree.
Okay,
So,
great.
Well, we thank you for positioning yourself on the front line here, because it's going to have quite an impact on Shelburne, and we appreciate the effort, and I think it's super to learn that you've gotten together with the Resources Committee, and we'll look forward to hearing from you later. We wish you every good fortune with the management plan, and hopefully the internships work. And if there's anything that we can further help you with, let Lee know, and
Members.
I'm sure we'll be supported. Yeah.
so
New
before I
members.
leave, there is a couple things that you can help us with, since you mentioned it. We're a committee that's supposed to have 7 members. We're down to 5 members right now, and we are going to be losing Jan, who will be moving out of Vermont in October. So we're going to be down to 4 members. We desperately need help with, there was a lovely ad in the Shelburne News for 2 committees, and we wished we had been in there, but if you hear or see anybody who would like to volunteer, help the town of Shelburne, loves trees, please
Wants
send
to learn
them.
to identify an ash tree and help inventory.
It does seem like
We
a
don't
great
have a student, well, we
committee,
have
right?
a student de facto member,
My
David's
daughter's
daughter.
only an 8th grader. We can't have her officially, I think, by the policy until she's in 9th grade, so.
She comes to events where there's food and helps us.
Yes.
Well, we should explore
Smart girl.
CVU for sure. you know,
Yes.
Or
and-
change our
And the
policy.
other, Bryce and whatnot, for sure.
Yeah.
Right,
not?
right. Anything we can, any suggestions of how you can help us with this would be really appreciated. We've tried with putting ads out in the Shelburne News at various points, and we just,
Would it
people
help to
kinda
say
come
it's the
and-
most exciting committee membership in
Wild
that's what
town?
we
and
think.
there's food.
To all those in TV viewing land.
We have to throw out that we are not aired, which is probably good.
Well, you're keeping it up at almost 9, so that's a good
Yeah.
And then the other quick thing, and this is not something you have to act on tonight, but we wanted to at least bring it to your attention, is we've been an advisory committee, and we would like to explore and the idea of becoming a tree board or a tree commission and have a little more standing and be able to help in the community. We'll do some research this fall and would like to work this winter and bring that idea to you. And along with that, since we've been operating, we did have initially town manager support because he was on the committee, but that was many, many town managers ago, and so we don't have any staff that helps us. We're doing everything as volunteers right now, and at one point when Joe was here, Ann did help us a little bit with various things. I realize staff is very short in terms of supply, but I just wanted to throw that out there as it would, we're doing a lot of work. We feel that having some kind of support somewhere would be helpful, and so we'll leave you with that thought, and hopefully we can talk more about it as things move on in this fall, summer, spring rather.
That's a good point about the advisory committee. I never gave that any thought, and I'm not sure why institutionally that would be any kind of problem. Yeah, we thank you.
Okay.
We thank you again. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the members who've come. Sorry to see you.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna miss Shelburne.
Yeah. No. But thank you very much. Thank you, David.
You're welcome. Thank you.
The next item is wildlife-human interaction policy proposal, which is a consideration of a proposed initiative. You've been provided a piece that I prepared that I don't know that we need to read at this point. The idea is that we have a major, one of the major town visions is conservation of its natural resources. Animals are an integral natural resource. It seems an opportune and necessary time to turn attention to the development of policy, which would give guidance and some direction to wildlife-human interaction. The proposal here is to ask the Natural Resources Committee to take the lead role in its development. We have various of us spoken with committee members, including its leadership, and they are willing to take on this really mammoth piece of work, and to some extent. But the proposal makes clear that there's no timetable here, as much as that the only conditions that really matter are adequate public input, a concerted effort at public outreach. The Lee and Dean, who would normally be willing and enthusiastic assistants in this process, have plates full, as we all know. And the proposal, in effect, says that they are not meant to be responsible for development of this policy, but are in reserve as guidance, sources of guidance, and help at needed points. There are several persons here tonight who were very helpful to Mike and I, who in a small group, Jim White and Josh Dean and Sharon McNair, Susan as well of the Natural Resources Committee. This is quite a satisfying time tonight to raise this, because the Beaver control technology was installed Friday. Some of you may recall that we had quite a bit of discussion about that at one point. It is in place and looks every bit like a technology. I think that's was an extremely generous offer from Green Mountain Animal Defenders, which Sharon McNair directs, and so that's done. That was a step in the process. So I'm going to ask two things. One, Jim White has, along with the others, has prepared some material which could be defined as a sort of preamble to the policy, to the benefit of the committee. not us. My proposal is pretty skeletal and straightforward and made in its simplest, most doable form. But Jim may want to speak to issues and practices that he and others feel should be addressed in the policy. The next step would be to meet with the committee and basically scope the job. Come to some conclusions about how best to approach it, how to deal with the comprehensive nature of it, which is considerable. And unless there are questions ahead of time, would you like Jim to briefly introduce us to your thoughts?
Jim White, Hillside Terrace. And I'm going to be very brief. I don't know if the select board got a copy of the preamble, which is only a page or so, but I'm going to summarize that, so I'm going to be even more brief than that. The town plan, especially the open space section, very eloquently discusses Shelburne's commitment to the conservation of what it calls natural communities. But to date, Shelburne has few, if any, actual policies that back up this plan. A group of us from Shelburne have been thinking about this, and we think it's time to consider a policy that focuses on human-wildlife interactions as a place to start. Why? The town plan affirms, 1, the importance of wildlife to Shelburne's quality of life, 2, the right of every species to survive, 3, that wildlife is, and I quote here, critical to biological diversity and the integrity of ecosystems, and 4, that all species, and I would remind us that humans are involved in this also, function as what the plan calls an interdependent landscape. I love that term. So these terms, interdependent landscape and ecosystems, really, for all practical purposes, are saying the same thing. That we're in this together at a very fundamental level, humans and animals. Proof of the interdependence is the number of human-wildlife interactions of one sort or another that play out in Shelburne. And one example of that is, of course, the beavers on Webster Road. One obvious reason for these interactions occurring at an increasing rate in most likelihood is that humans are taking up more room. And so as a result, wildlife habitat is diminishing. In other words, we're all sharing a smaller, more crowded space. Hence, managing human-wildlife coexistence has become a cornerstone of wildlife management throughout the United States. We're simply suggesting that Shelburne look into this trend and find a way to participate in it that makes sense. And our group is basically supporting the initiation of a discussion by interested townspeople that focuses on human-wildlife interactions and creates more awareness of them. And we think out of this conversation and awareness, we're going to be able to come up with a sensible, coherent policy that we can implement. And perhaps it will even be a model for other towns, since this is something that is still fairly rare in Vermont, I suspect. So we are asking for the support of the Select Board in making this happen. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. One thing that I didn't mention, but you've read in the proposal, is that it seems to me that we are our own best resource here, that we have in our community a sizable number of experts, either professionally or by experience, who can assist the development of this policy. It may be later, in later stages, if there's some technical need that seems worthy of asking or contracting with a consultant, that may be an outcome in the future. But for the moment and for the foreseeable future, my sense is we have the resources amongst ourselves, and that this should be homegrown in every respect. So, in any case, Mike, do you want to?
No, I mean, I've been involved with Jim and the rest of the gang, and I think it's a great idea. I do think, I mean, my suggestion is that this is something for natural resources to take the lead on and do some investigation and work about, to also canvass members of the town and the community and get a sense of what's needed and what's appropriate. But I do think it is consistent with the town plan and consistent with the sorts of things we've been looking to achieve. So I'd like to see, I'd like to see that developed. I'd like to see something, come out of the conversation, something workable that we could have a look at, and whatever time frame works. I think it's kind of up to the Natural Resources Committee. And my understanding is there's been some discussion with them as well.
Yes.
About this, is that
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So, yeah, I'm all for it.
Colleen?
So to be honest, because maybe it came up at the meeting last week, and so maybe you guys are familiar, you're clearly familiar with this, Mike, but I'm not, and I'm just a little bit confused. I think typically for a proposal, I would have thought that this is an issue that has arisen in the town and a problem we're hoping to solve by coming up with a policy. This, I'm not exactly sure what the policy is supposed to be trying to solve, other than just publicly stating that we think wildlife is a resource.
Well,
And so I'm really not quite sure what the aim is.
I think the idea that, and this is what I've been advocating for, is to actually ask the natural resources and other committees in town, how can we deal with this issue, which seems to me to have come up with the beavers, and there are other kinds of issues I think people have talked about, like euthanizing rabid foxes, having the police do that, which Josh Dean, I guess, had mentioned also was something that was concerning to him. So, and there are other kinds, what do you do about, animals that have been killed or injured? So I think people have asked, like, do we have can we do something about this? And my suggestion is, well, the natural place to start is natural resources. Let's see what their recommendations would be on how to deal with these types of issues.
So this is in specifically for how town personnel would deal with animals within the town.
Yeah, I think it's specifically about how the town deals with animal interactions.
I think, Colleen, when you review the goals of the town plan, and we've had discussion on implementing those, you have to be struck by the number of them that refer to natural resources protection. And yet there's no town policy. This would be an effort to establish guidance along a number of trajectories. For instance, the DRB checks off a number of boxes in reviewing applications. Wildlife habitat protection is not one of them. There's every reason to think that there should be serious consideration of whether it should be. We have an animal control officer, a function, but it's very prescribed to domestic cats, dogs, and other domesticants. I think actually pigs are included there too, but it does not deal with a variety of injured, disabled animals for whom towns, in dealing with which the town has no guidance in the form of policy or protocol. We have a generous amount of acreage in open space, a priority of which may well be wildlife habitat, but there's no guidance in the form of policy as to how that should best be enacted. You remember we had a protocol that was developed by South Burlington staff, along with the dean came and spoke to us about wildlife corridors. I think all of us were struck by the idea that animals underway don't distinguish between borders of towns, and it would be very sensible to have something consistent from town to town on a known or potential corridor. That was sort of a pocket policy in a sense, a sort of a step in this same direction. But when you read, I was struck reading the town plan at the number of references to natural resource conservation and the fact that in some very important areas of decision-making, town staff as well as town bodies, we lack policy and guidance as to how that's to be accomplished and made the most effective. So I think this is an effort to address the problem in its most holistic sense. And we'll learn a great deal in the process of what's doable and what's not, and what could be converted to an actual action and what remains an aspiration. But I think initiating it, calling attention to it, and initiating it in a formal way is a step that I think by which the town will benefit greatly.
I'm supportive. Anything we can do to sort of action against town plan priorities, I'm supportive. The one thing I'd want to look at, I haven't looked at it in a little while, is just the open space plan. I think that does sort of speak to some of this, probably not all of it, the tactical sort of injured animals, but I think at a broader conceptual level. I think I would like to see us scope this and then have someone from the select board just stay engaged on it, as opposed to the board discussing this on a regular occurrence over the next few meetings. I think, to me, it feels like a Q1, Q2 type 2020 project. And if we have someone from the board just working with the Natural Resources Committee and the other stakeholders, then we could sort of have comfort and confidence that it's going to be marshaled appropriately without burdening town staff, which I just don't think we have the bandwidth to sort of have Lee or Dean or anyone else.
No, I think our role is to get it
as
going.
a liaison, just to get it going, scope it out, come back to the board,
And then we remain a resource through time for whatever they come back to us with.
Does the state have anything that directs how to deal with injured animals?
Not really. I mean, that's just one, for example. With the beaver issue, it's actually surprising how little guidance there is from the state on those issues. So I think, and speaking with the group of individuals interested in the policy, one of the things that comes up is there's really a lack of guidance, really a lack of clarity. And I think it's just consistent with the aspirations in the town plan to actually start thinking a little bit more carefully about what exactly do we want to happen when it comes to managing these kinds of conflicts. Do we want to think about more sort of holistic approaches to doing this? And rather than sit here on the select board where, we don't really know anything about this and we don't have the time or the resources to put towards it, I think we should ask some of our committees to take a look and see what can be done here, what's feasible, what do we need, does the town need something, and have them kind of tell us, this is what we've seen, this is what we've heard. That's my thought.
I think public outreach, community input is going to be a really major portion of this effort at the start and for some time, don't you, Jim?
Yeah. In fact, I was just going to make a quick point that the end result of this may be 90% education and 10% defined policy action. I think that the education component, and I don't really know how this is going to play out, so I can't really talk about it in detail, it's going to be critical. A lot of people, they run into issues with wildlife and they don't know how to handle them. They don't know where to go. If they go to the state, often the state really doesn't have an answer. So maybe even providing, a mechanism through the town website that gives them some hands-on information will be an important piece in itself. But I think education is going to be a big part of this.
Susan, would you like to comment as a committee member? Okay. Is there any other discussion, comment? I didn't anticipate that this would take the form of a vote necessarily as much as just a consensus direction to the committee with whom we've made contact and who are aware of the interest and who will not be surprised to hear from us that we're on, we decided to go ahead. And I think it's very possible that Mike, I would like to join him. We'll meet with them at some point soon.
Sure.
And the discussion will be
Even
the
if
scope
it's
of
just
it.
checking in periodically,
yeah.
it doesn't need to be a formal liaison
Yeah.
in my mind. It's just staying in
Yeah.
touch with
Yeah.
that group
Help them
and sort
get
of
going
coming
and-
back to us and giving them
Now, this
direction
is
if
listed
things
as an
start.
action item. Do we want an action?
It's
just
really
the
up to you if you
consensus, I
have
think, is
consensus.
Well,
Think
Because,
Okay.
yeah, just
direction
because
to.
All right.
you okay
I think
with
this
that?
is more informative more than anything else.
Yep.
This is the first time I've heard of it.
Yeah,
My
I agree.
hesitancy only comes because it just doesn't seem.
We don't know what it is.
Yeah, I just don't
yet.
know what this
So I
means.
think it has to come back to us, but general support for the concept
For
and,
exploring,
and
okay.
direction to the
All right.
committee to proceed.
Sure.
Any other comments? Before we finish, Sharon, thank you again on the part of Green Mountain Animal Defenders for all your help. We have to recognize Josh Dean, who got right down in the mud and water and spent a good part of the day Friday assisting Skip in installing that device, which David has since had the opportunity to take a look at. So we express our gratitude for your generosity, the generosity of your organization. Any other discussion? Hearing none, the next item is an occasion for me to apologize, and that is that I had intended to prepare a meld in effect of the Stowe Beaver control policy as a protocol, along with some comments, some external comments, and I'm apologetic to tell you that I didn't have the time to do it, and I'll have to come back in 2 weeks. So 1,000 pardons.
No worries.
But anyone who has an interest in the technology at Webster Road, if you're very careful about parking along the road, which we would not recommend you do, and instead, if you pull in near the pump station, where there's a little protected area, because it's pretty good traffic along through there, and there's a little rise, it reminds you a little bit of Marset Road, please take a look. And if you have questions, several of us, Mike and I included, and we'll be happy to help you come to an understanding what's there and why it's there. We're going to monitor the progress. And once again, we thank everybody involved in the installation. Thank you. And apologies on my part, gang, to everybody that for 13, I do not have anything prepared. Saying that, we'll move on to 14. 14, I've got two very quick comments, Lee, at risk of extending. One, it struck me suddenly this afternoon that we bill payments 3 times a year. I'm not sure what the start date is, what the final date is.
Yep.
So if we cast a policy in terms of so many days from when it's due, I'm not sure what we would consider a due date for taxes.
Yeah, Peter raised a similar question.
And it's unmanageable if we break it up into 3, first.
Yeah.
Second, I thought this was harsh.
Just to go back, so
Yeah.
you mean with the 3 installments, you could have 3
We
separate
run 3
late
different
payments.
processes per
Right,
payment,
you could trigger 3
which
separate.
is just unmanageable,
So you need one point in time, one payment, so to
When
speak.
when
Right.
is the payment
Annual.
due?
Yep.
And I
Okay.
would think, I was prepared to suggest that would be 1 year, that would be April
Right.
15 of the following year, notwithstanding 3 payments of August, November, and March.
Right.
So that our calendar should start, that should be the starting date, not August 15, as a sense. I know that wasn't meant, but if you read it strictly,
Yep.
that that's what you come up with.
Right.
Secondly, I thought the timing was a little unforgiving. No, my sense would be you and everybody chime in because we can return to this next meeting. My sense would be within a year it should be paid. If it's not paid, a lien goes on. And that there should be, as much as a personal view, there should be as much as another year to pay the outstanding obligation, or it's a tax sale. That's 1 and 1, maybe 1.5. But the key dates are a lien goes on if at the anniversary date it's not paid. Any portion or the entirety is not paid. That's the town protection. And 1 year, and then a taxpayer has a year from then to satisfy the obligation. That would mean structuring partial payments on a 1-year basis, not as the draft reads, without any time frame. In other words, the payment plan would be 1 year from an April 15 to an April 15. And then that would be, that anniversary date would be the anchor to the remaining timetables. That would be my personal sense, a year and a year.
So right now it's 6 months, right?
Yeah, right now it's
You're
a
saying
matter
go
of
from 6 months to a
several
year.
months and a stepping process through several months.
Right.
I would simplify it and say, if it's not paid in a year, what portion, a lien goes on. To satisfy the lien, you have a year.
And the year includes all of the notifications, right?
Correct.
Right. You're not
So you have
tacking
a
that on top of
process
the
of,
year.
no, you have a
Yeah.
process of notifications through. So 2 years from the date that you were billed, if you haven't paid, you're subject to a tax sale. Now, some of us might feel a year and a half from the time.
Why your preference for 2 years versus, why are you picking the
Because I
dates you're
think,
picking?
I think there are extenuating circumstances, some of which are simply matters that simply require more time.
Well, we could change
Yeah.
the language to May
Could.
result.
That's just a suggestion. I think a 60-day trigger is a pretty quick trigger on payment. If someone can't pay it 30 days, I don't know how rational it may be for us to say you have to pay by 60. Our exposure is the tax year.
Yeah.
Our revenue exposure is the tax year. In other words, if we get the money by the end of the tax year, we're okay with penalties and fees, but that's our exposure. Our exposure is not 3 months or 6 months.
Right.
So if we use the anniversary date and we're paid or a lien goes on when we should be in the year, then everything's fine. There are fees and interest given, at steps. If we're not, that taxpayer for that amount owed has another year to pay. If they, in the meantime, take on an additional year,
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
which is a possibility, you've got a block there because you've got a lien and you've got a definite tax sale date. So you're not going to be exposed more than 1 more year. In other words, you may have 2 plus 1 year by the time the tax sale occurs.
My only concern with this is we're basically still carrying that debt, and it makes accounting, I feel like, a little bit more challenging because we don't really know if we're going to get those monies at the end of that tax year.
No,
If we had
no.
I feel like there has to be some attempt and some payment at 6 months, at least for just planning purposes.
Well, a person has the ability to do that. I didn't mean to excise the whole payment schedule and meeting and making a plan. I didn't mean to suggest that we do away with that. In the meantime, that taxpayer has all of those opportunities to pay it in a shorter period of time. I'm thinking in terms of the prescription of when the lien goes on, Colleen.
Oh, just when the lien
Yeah.
goes on.
When does the lien go on? The lien goes on, I'm suggesting, 1 year.
So if you're making partial
I feel
payments,
like that's too much.
as reflected in the fourth paragraph, there's no lien, right? There wouldn't be a lien triggered if you
Only
enter
for the-
into a
what
payment plan
remains.
that's 5% of the balance due, right? On
So-
a monthly basis. Am I
Yeah.
reading that right?
I think so. So just by way of brief introduction, as you know, we've been working on delinquent tax collections, made some progress. There was suggestion we should have some sort of policy so there's clarity and consistency. I had proposed something very generic just to launch it. Strong suggestion was we needed something more prescriptive. So this was modifying what I'll call a very early draft that the League of Cities and Towns sent to me, but which they haven't actually published yet. Theirs was even much stricter than this. I think even this may be too strict given what I'll call humanitarian concerns for people who are in tough circumstances. We have several people making what I'll call good faith payments, but the reality is it's kind of like paying the interest on a credit card debt. It could be 10, 20 years before they dig out of it. Whether that's appropriate for us to carry is where this policy decision lies. Where's that balance between trying to work with our landowners and taxpayers at the same time, recognizing it's an obligation to society to pay these. And
And a tax sale is not obligatory.
It
Tax
is not.
sale is only an option if at that point a tax sale is, call it inhumane. I mean,
no, at some point you
then
have to do it.
Then a town has
Right.
has the prerogative of deciding on other methods.
Can
I
you
mean,
help me understand what force, I mean, and this is gonna sound naive, but what force does the lien actually have? Is it more the threat that, or are we actually
no, it's a
recouping-
mortgage
We're recouping the costs at the point of.
Well, the
applying.
lien
at
doesn't.
sale.
Sometimes it doesn't do anything.
The
till
lien
it's a
doesn't get
sale.
the money, but if somebody applies to refinance, for example, that's going to show up as a red flag in that process. And at some point, somebody triggers that and says, no.
So
Can't
from a
do things.
financial point of view, in terms of what we're actually recouping, and in terms of what's owed to us, what does the lien accomplish?
Nothing.
Wouldn't change
It's-
any of
Unless
oh,
the
it's
there's
a
a
security.
sale, if there's a sale of the property, then the liens.
It's an
are paid.
absolute security, because if the obligation is not met, we own the property.
Okay.
Right.
But from
So-
the practical point of view of putting.
It's a secured liability versus an uncollectible debt.
Okay.
You owe the amount.
Right,
you owe the
Peter?
You do
balance
a lien, but you don't own the
upon a sale,
property.
correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it comes out.
Say that again?
yeah.
It's a
You don't own the property, it's just the lien would, the
Up to
lien
the
amount would come out.
Depending on what it's
if
sold
there's a
for.
s-
Okay.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
the-
That difference is yours.
Right, priority security.
Yeah.
Uh,
It becomes a secured liability versus an uncollectible debt.
And then how does the lien get removed? When it's paid in full?
When paid or on sale or transfer.
Do the extenuating circumstances that we see with these situations tend to mirror what we have in the policy 1801 waiver
Hard to know for sure.
exceptions generally, or are they
Those are
different?
just late
Good,
payments.
good question. And the reason I don't know is that when people apply for the waiver, they are being very
More
clear in
specific.
what their rationale is, and we
Right.
ask them to justify it under
Which is
one or
helpful.
more of the criteria. Here, in my conversations with individuals, I don't always know if I'm getting a complete story, and I don't say that to be negative, but there's, people are going to be sensitive about what they are willing
fair.
to say and how they landed in those circumstances.
Could we incorporate that as guidance? Maybe that's where Jamie's headed, that because it's the town manager, it's the collector that's making.
Do a little diligence to understand what
Yeah,
are the
yeah.
extenuating circumstances.
Because it's the
generally, since we have
collector
no
that's
idea.
making the decision to accept the payment plan.
Or how far,
And in
hard to
that
push.
decision-making, we might incorporate these factors to be considered.
I think that's a great idea, not only for consistency, but we've already tested those
Right.
essentially
We're all comfortable with
against
those
our own.
criteria.
That's a
and they
great
seem
idea.
To work very well, and the community supports them.
That's a great idea.
It doesn't mean we wouldn't still continue to push hard, but at least there's some framework for exercising judgment.
Sure. Right.
Rather than just either
Arbitrary.
letting it go or being.
Where did you
arbitrary.
come out on the
Yeah.
3 payments per year?
In
That
terms
question
of,
of what's our start and what's our finish date?
I'd like to come back to you on that. I think
Yeah.
we've had some good conversation about
Yeah.
that. Peter's had some suggestions on that as well, and you're right, we do
Okay.
need a fixed,
Yeah.
single.
Has to be one point in time.
Yeah.
during
I
the
apologize, I
year.
didn't get a lot of
Yeah.
this
No,
to you
it's fine.
earlier. I
Yeah.
really am sorry
This was-
about that.
I think we sort of knew
This
this
was a
going
good
to be a
start, but I
discussion.
really didn't think
Yeah.
we were gonna get to a landing
Right.
on this
Yeah.
Can you
tonight.
give like just a generic example of a situation in which somebody wouldn't pay their taxes, their property taxes for an entire year, and they're in a circumstance where we don't think they're going to pay and deserve this type of like leniency? Like just a
Well,
generic example,
I
as
mean,
best you can. I'm just trying to understand.
Sure. I think what we have, just to give you some tangible examples, I think what we have right now in terms of the spectrum of delinquencies ranges from at least one person who just routinely pays late. They have the ability, they pay and they pay their penalties, and we come out better, but in the short run, we're short the cash. So it's everything from somebody who, for whatever reasons, just decides they're always going to pay late on their time
And they pay
frame,
late fees and
And they pay it all.
interest and, okay.
to others who are truly in difficult straits. We have one property that's been advertised for foreclosure. And that foreclosure notice does specify that whoever takes this has to settle up with all these other debts, like property taxes. I don't know how and why it got to foreclosure. It may not be my purpose to know those, but clearly somebody got into a tough circumstance in life and can't carry the weight of the property.
And the top
Okay.
10 is what,
Others
about 90% of the 400K? Is it 400? Generally?
Something like 390.
390, 400?
Yeah, and
Top
I've been
10's about
focusing my
90%,
efforts on
right?
the biggest ones.
Yeah.
Two completely extraneous comments. I had an experience once of a payer who decided that the interest charged by the town was less than that person could get it by an investment, and routinely and regularly invested the money.
Yeah. I mean,
That's what I was
He was
thinking.
investing in the town.
Yeah.
better. The Bank of Shelburne.
Yeah.
I mean, and to that point,
It was a very calculated strategy, and until the banking world turned on its heel a little bit, and you know, and I've also had experiences where you do not want to obtain a property,
right,
which itself is more liability than the worth of your owed tax. So there has to be a lot of discretion built into. It can't be just rule on top of rule. There's got to be a lot of. But I think, as a personal comment, between now and next meeting, timetable starting when.
yep,
If we can set a firm, fix that.
right.
And then maybe draw out 6 months, 9 months. Others may have different points of view. Just what's the total? By what year do you have an option to initiate a tax sale? And work our way backward, maybe. And then all of us may have a little different sense of 6 months versus 3 and that kind of thing. And then I think we should build in a good deal of discretion on the part of the tax collector, recognizing all of these potential situations. I think that's a great idea to incorporate the very same criteria we're using as we did early this evening. I think that's a great idea.
Yep.
Sounds good, yeah.
Okay?
I think that's fine, and just like the only word of caution as far as building in a lot of discretion and to whoever administers it, whether it's the town manager or in the future someone else, is if, somebody's working with somebody and then the position changes, if we don't have a policy that kind of governs it and it's up to somebody's discretion changes, and then that's where I think we run into problems. The whole point of having
Yeah.
a policy is that it's clear.
You risk inconsistency, and that was
If
one of the
We're gonna have a
comments.
policy,
Yeah.
but then say, well, it's up to the person.
Yeah, exactly,
Then we
and
might as
that's
well not have a
why
policy.
Which is why that 1801 guidance is helpful,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? For
Yeah.
different people come on and off this board, and you can look at that list and say.
Exactly,
looks like it
Colleen,
fits in there.
because that's why payment plans can't all have different terminal dates.
Yeah.
One can't be 8 years and the next one 4, so
I think we need a policy. I like the direction here. I think we just need to do some
Sure.
fine tuning.
And I knew this would take a few.
Of course, yeah, and
time.
continued just discussion of this. It's not
Absolutely.
super time sensitive, but
Yep.
we should get on
To
it.
Colleen's point, what form do current arrangements make when you work out some sort of payment? I mean, is there some sort of, contract? Is there something signed saying that an individual will pay? So if we were worried about continuity and consistency, how is that actually formalized?
Yeah, Peter can probably speak to that. My understanding is we do have a process where people can sign a payment plan, and typically then those are automatic withdrawals. So it's not dependent on somebody.
Okay.
We hope they'll write us the check this week or this
Right,
month.
okay.
But some of them are, understandably, with people's circumstances, longer term than might be considered reasonable from the town's perspective. And therein lies that balancing
balance.
test, that challenge.
And just
Okay.
to say it publicly, I think that your judgment and perspective is fantastic, and you're a very compassionate human being. But I'm just curious if, things change as the years go
Absolutely.
by.
Any discussion? Any further? Tom?
Falls Road. Irrespective of placing a lien on a property, is there any way a delinquent taxpayer could sell the property and the town would be left holding the bag, or are back taxes always part of a sale that they have to be paid by the new owner?
Well, and if they do a title search, there's no way. I mean, there probably are cases of intra-family transfers, which you remember the discussion about accessory structures? And what happens if a family member, David's left, but remember the question he asked, if a family member makes it and then leaves, is the town stuck with the accessory occupant, even though that person now does not meet the criteria? You probably would have circumstances where a property ownership is transferred, but you're talking about outside of probate, you're talking about outside of title searches, you're talking about outside legitimate real estate transactions. There's usually an inquiry to a town office about tax status, and will it prevent
Anybody
some
getting a
very
mortgage?
imaginative type who's given up on arbitraging interest payments from figuring some way? Probably not. But a lien is a pretty public document, so it'd be pretty difficult to sidestep it in any legal fashion.
I mean,
I think.
potentially, if
I'm
someone
not a
were,
lawyer.
sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone were to buy a property for cash, they might be able to avoid it, but anybody
Yeah.
who needs to get a mortgage
Right.
Yeah,
is likely,
or clear title, even if they bought for cash, if they cleared title.
Because the bank owns it.
They become, in fact, they're a second, this is a superior lien. The mortgage becomes a subordinate lien. That's an interesting, now I say that, I should be careful. That was statute in Maine. I'm not sure that's the case in Vermont, but I'm not sure. But it has a high rank, a very high rank so the mortgage holder has responsibility to be sure, for their purposes of collection, they have a responsibility to attend to the lien. It's a little more than a mechanic's lien, which is another form and type. It has much more strength of
But 90% of the time, it's a finance company, mortgage company. And you can't get another mortgage on that until you get a clear title.
exactly. Yeah.
And then that, you've got to go top down. I mean, it takes you a month to get
Yeah.
all the paperwork done before you can buy a house.
It's pretty
Then you got-
conspicuous
then
in
you
the
got a
record.
30-year, 15 or
Yeah,
10-year
exactly.
mortgage, okay?
Yeah. It's pretty conspicuous in the
Yeah.
record, Mac, yeah.
You can't just sell it because you don't own it.
Yeah, yeah.
Good on this?
So
Sorry, gang,
Is
we're
this
all-
for next meeting? We're gonna revisit
We
this?
should pick it
Yeah.
back up.
sure.
Okay,
Great.
all set?
Good.
I think we're good.
Next item is business, all set, Colleen?
Yeah.
Next anything? further? That's okay, Lee, to come back next
Yes.
time? The next item, and the last, is business retention as a focus for the Select Board's economic development discussion at its September 24th meeting. Do you want to?
Yeah, just very briefly, Mike and I are leading the charge on our Economic Development Summit, which we've scheduled for the second meeting in September.
Yes.
I believe we're doing some outreach to possible attendees. We have a couple confirmed. Kind of early days, we're just sketching out what sort of should we try to cover in this meeting within a meeting, which is probably going to be, I don't know, 90 minutes, 120, right, 2 hours maybe. And we've sort of kept coming back to this business retention, and this is a concept that I'm familiar with. I sit on the GBIC board, which is the Greater Burlington Industrial Corporation, and the big push is to really keep what we have. You know, you've seen this with IBM, Global Foundries, huge efforts to just retain existing businesses. So we felt this was an area that was probably ripe for focus. More work to do on the agenda and scoping, and we've talked about Route 7 corridor with the fire, rescue, healthy living project being front and center within the community, be a good area of focus. Form-based zoning, of course, also a focus in the corridor. Beyond that, I don't know, Mike, if you want to share any further thoughts.
You and I had talked about a kind of brainstorming
Right.
format where we could draw on business leaders and experts in the area and kind of get a lot of public input and formulate some sort of actionable plans that we can hope to implement. So, but we're still chatting, still working it out.
You know, I couldn't agree more. I mean, economic development all by itself is almost unmanageable as a subject, you know. And I think so often, I'm as guilty as anyone, so often we think of economic development in business attraction terms, and yet preserving our own. And we have issues in Shelburne that directly impact businesses who wish to remain or wish to expand in their business or whatever, that we should be probably quite attentive to. And it seems to me this is a really good step to focus first on our own, in a sense, where we also have the benefit of experience and personal testimony, kind of. I mean, we have businesses that can tell us where they think the needs are and where we should be putting our energy and resources. So I think this is a great idea. And by adopting that focus, we create some more manageable situation in talking about a subject that could go on 18 months. And, you know, so I think that's a great idea. I'm really pleased that you both are headed in that direction.
Great.
Thank you, Mike and Jamie, for taking on an extra.
You're welcome. We'll have some good speakers and hopefully a moderator just to keep it somewhat
That's great.
organized and on schedule, which we aren't this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to the chair.
Well, thank you.
Second that.
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, seeing no hands, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Mike moves.
And
Colleen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Right.